retake occupied peninsula. PM set to cave in on benefits rise. There was speculation that universal credit would rise in line with average earnings, around 5%, but it will likely rise with inflation, which is double that at 10%. Sunday Express next. Heads down and charge. PM's strategy to revive the economy as Michael Gove, former Levelling Up secretary, is labelled a sadist who will put Labour in power. The Sun on Sunday, dancer Abby's heartbreak. Strictly star AJ ditched me for a model. Dancer Abby Quinnan has revealed her heartache after being dumped by Strictly star AJ Pritchard for a stunning new model. And last but not least, the Daily Star Sunday. It's strife, Jim, but not as we know it. Clean me up, Scotty! William Shatner lives up to his name and reveals tummy trouble on stage. William Shatner's comedy gig was nearly ruined by a captain's log. The Star Trek legend had to waddle off and swap his keks mid-act. And on that lavatorial note, those are your front pages. Nick Dixon, have you cleaned your pipes tonight?
That's a bizarre intro, Mark, to really what is an incredibly serious story. But this is presumably about Putin, who has dealt a bitter blow as blast cripples key bridge in Crimea, the Observer, as you just read out. And this is the Kerch Bridge. I'm sure you've all seen the images. It's been blown up. Some people are saying it's a suicide bomber. The other theory is, of course, it's these underwater drones that we may have given to Ukraine, is my understanding. And it makes it more likely that the Nord Stream 2 was done in a similar way. You have to ask that question. And it's just another escalation of this terrible war. And people are being quite flippant about it, bizarrely. I mean, the government of Ukraine tweeted "sick burn," which I find, it may be quite funny, but I think some people on Twitter don't really grasp the reality of a potential nuclear war. You see people say, no, we have to be tough, we can't back down, we have to go for it. Yeah, nuclear war is the only option. It's like, do people understand what is involved in such a thing? You know, I think there's a lack of reality going on, because this is another, I think, pretty disturbing escalation in the war.
Although a moral and strategic blow to the Russians, wouldn't you say, Toby?
Certainly, yes. It was a symbolic bridge because it connected Russia to Crimea, and it was also a way to supply Russia's armies in the Ukraine. So, yeah, I think it's a target the Ukrainians have been trying to destroy for a number of months and finally pulled it off in what looks like a very daring raid.
Indeed. So, we'll keep an eye on the situation in Ukraine. But moving on for now, let's have a look at the Sunday Telegraph. And Liz Truss is speaking out against the Tory infighting. Toby.
Yes, so looks like there's a fight back going on in tomorrow's papers from Team Liz. And in addition to branding Gove a sadist whom everyone should ignore, they're also saying that if the party doesn't unite behind the new leader, we'll be facing a monstrous coalition of Labour and the Scottish National Party. I think it's an echo of the coalition of chaos argument that David Cameron used in 2015, which I guess proved effective. He won a majority. But it's slightly less credible as a threat, because at the moment the threat isn't that if the Conservatives do any worse, we'll be faced with a coalition of Keir Starmer and Nicola Sturgeon. I mean, at the moment, given how far Labour's leading in the polls, it looks like Starmer will win an overall majority. So it won't be a monstrous coalition. It'll just be a monstrous Labour Party with a majority.
But do the Tories deserve power when they indulge in such a soap opera? So much politics behind the scenes, with a new Prime Minister who's tackling an economic crisis. We're navigating our way out of the pandemic. Surely she deserves a bit more loyalty and a bit more support. She went for the 45p top-rate tax cut, which most Tory backbenchers immediately disowned, even though it would either cost $2 billion or nothing, depending on which economist you ask. And now her plans to potentially raise universal credit in line with earnings rather than inflation has been thwarted too. How can she be a great Prime Minister if she's not allowed to pursue the policies upon which she was elected?
Well, I guess one of the difficulties is that she hasn't won a general election. She doesn't have much in the way of a mandate to embark on this radical new plan for growth. It's a bit of a departure with what's gone before. She hasn't done much to try and build bridges with people in Rishi Sunak's team. So, you know,
and of
she's
course,
now finding herself a bit isolated.
Tory backbenchers don't rate her in the main, do they? It was a minority of Tory MPs that backed her in the leadership.
Yes, that's right. They preferred Rishi Sunak. But do you think there's an analogy here to be made between Liz Truss and Vladimir Putin? You know, she's hunkering down in her bunker. She's surrounding herself with her most loyal lieutenant. She's identified an enemy at the gate, not Zelensky, but Michael Gove. And yet, you know, Gove has caused this terrible harm to her credibility by launching a kind of drone attack on the mini budget. That was the equivalent of the Kerch Bridge last Sunday. You know, and she's, dictators. They need an enemy, don't they, a dictator?
I did see a picture of the other day, a massive table, with like a 10-foot table. Everyone else was at the other end, and she was totally isolated. And she made a great speech about the colonisation and the evil imperialists.
Can she ride a horse topless?
Great question. I think we've got a picture of that, haven't we? No, apparently not. Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, they're in self-destruct mode, Mark. Why did they ever have to get rid of Boris? I mean, Liz Truss's personal ratings are now worse than Boris's at the height of Partygate. So you have to wonder what it was all for, in a sense. And they're in a very tricky position because it's essentially at least three different parties, isn't it? You've got the One Nation Conservatives, you've got the Brexit wing, you've got the Red Wall, which is kind of a completely new thing. Yeah. So there's at least three parties. From what I gather, I mean, you were at the conference, what I can gather, it was just chaos and people drinking and just despair. People even saying maybe it's good that the Tories should have some time out of office, which is when you've really waved the white flag. I mean, that would be a disaster.
People were telling me, you know, in the bars of the Hyatt, it was like the last days of Rome. You know, it was full-on debauchery, wild parties, ministers like Conor Burns, proposition
touching thighs,
and right. And I never saw any of it. I was busy,
working hard,
getting a good night's sleep so I could do my panels the following morning.
Can I add one thing on what we said? That coalition of chaos thing. Isn't it much like Corbyn would be even worse? Don't they keep trotting this out? Isn't it getting a bit thin now? It's like coalition of chaos, Corbyn would be worse, the Starmer coalition, you know, that's all they've got. And at this point, most people think it wouldn't be worse.
That's true. I think most people probably think that, you know, a coalition of, you know, the SNP and Keir Starmer's Labour Party might just be preferable. I mean, obviously I don't, but it doesn't seem like much of a bogeyman.
But I think Tory MPs didn't get the memo that they've got 2 years to get the economy growing, and they're only going to achieve that, have any chance at the next election if they unite, which is very much the message of Tory party members who have written to the leadership of the party saying, get a grip. And certainly it's in Liz Truss's interest that actually happens. Let's stay on the Tories if we can. The Sunday Times, and whilst Conor Burns might be out of a job, perhaps not all is lost, Nick.
Well, this is, Conor Burns, minister sacked for misconduct claims, is on track for a knighthood from Boris Johnson. So it's a strange one. I mean, we just touched on it now, no pun intended, because he's, of course, accused of touching a man's thigh at the conference. Not clear if it was Toby's, we don't know. But there was a lot of drinking that went on, from what I hear.
The pity.
I mean, in historical Tory sleaze standards, this is quite small, isn't it? But post-Me Too, and in the strange moment we're in now, it seems like quite a big deal, because post-Boris, post-Pincher, and obviously Truss has had to deal with it as quickly as possible. But this has not gone down well with the party, because there are people saying there hasn't been due process. He was a well-liked person. He was friends with Margaret Thatcher. He's a big Boris guy. So this has not gone down very well. And we're even at the bizarre point where Mel B was tweeting about it. I don't know if we've got the tweet. Yeah, so Mel B, Conor Burns put a sort of 3-tweet thread about why he was innocent. And then Mel B wrote, really? You're shocked about the complaint? Let me remind you of what you said to me, or said me in lift. She missed out some words there, unfortunately. But he said something to Mel B in a lift, allegedly. And then he apparently said he's not aware of having met Mel B, although the key part might be not aware of it. If you were blind drunk, and you might not know which one she was, the Spice Girls, I suppose. But yeah, so the Mel B gate is now...
Well, whatever he said, it must have been brief. Unless he was in a skyscraper.
Well, unless the lift was broken, and it was like a long conversation.
It's not a very big building. The friends of Conor Burns are rallying round and trying to mount some kind of defence, and they claim that he's being singled out as a sacrificial lamb by Liz Truss to prove that she won't tolerate any dissent, because apparently he was a little bit critical of her on various panels at fringe events leading up to this episode in the bar, and normally that kind of thing wouldn't kind of be a sacking offence, but in his case, his real sin was to be disloyal, so he's been made an example of. That's what his friends are claiming.
Do you think she should have put a Sunakite into the cabinet, somebody like Michael Gove? keep your enemies closer and all that.
According to the Sunday Times, in a story tomorrow, she offered Michael Gove a job without actually specifying what it was on the eve of conference. Said it would be playing an important diplomatic role with a major ally. Could have been the ambassadorship to Israel, which is apparently becoming available soon. But in spite of, politely declining it and not giving any hint that he would unleash this drone attack on her mini budget in last Sunday's morning politics shows. So they claim that they did offer him a job.
But are we led to believe that that would be a role for which he'd have to lose his seat and could he have remained an MP? Or was it a case of getting rid of him?
Yeah, maybe he suspected that, and maybe he hasn't yet abandoned his own ambitions to become leader one day.
I've heard it rumoured that Truss is quoted to have said she hates Michael Gove. Well, that's what. Not maybe she didn't say it, but people say she hates Gove. Whereas Gove's been a bit smart about it. He says publicly, "Oh, I like Liz," while simultaneously undermining all of her policies.
Tremendous respect for her.
Yeah, tremendous. Meanwhile, she shouldn't have done the tax rate, and she should raise benefits in line with inflation. And I'm going to undermine her at every turn.
I mean, there was one quite nice detail buried in the story about Conor Burns, which is that in Boris Johnson's resignation honours list, he's also nominated various sitting Conservative MPs for peerages, Nadine Dorries, Nigel Adams amongst them. And that will cause problems because that could, if they take up those seats in the House of Lords, that will trigger by-elections. And the last thing Liz Truss wants is, a cluster of by-elections when she's 33 points behind in the polls.
It's like she can't get rid of Boris's legacy, isn't it? Because then the stories are still, Boris giving knighthoods to his mates. In a way, why do we care? He's not even the Prime Minister, but somehow it's still dogging him.
Briefly, is the issue that the supporters of Sunak are not quite willing to bury the hatchet, that there's still a dream that they could unseat Truss pre the next election? Because I think once the Tories accept that it's Truss until January 2025, I think the point at which that happens, I think they will unite. But it's the fact that this feels like unfinished business.
Well, I'll tell you a secret. It may not be that big a secret, but 99% of Conservative MPs believe that they can one day lead the party and walk into Downing Street. Even if they've been defeated in a leadership election, they don't give up on that dream. Even Boris, who's been kicked out of Downing Street as PM, hasn't given up on that dream. So I don't think for a second Rishi Sunak will have given up on that ambition.
I'm not even in the pie, and I haven't given up on it myself.
Me neither.
Dixon for Prime Minister. There you go. A coalition of hell between himself and Tobin. Let's have a look at The Independent on Sunday. And the Church are trying to protect the UK's international reputation, Tobin. How so?
Yes, well, Justin Welby, shock horror, has intervened once again in a politically contentious area. He has urged Liz Truss to drop her plans to move Britain's embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which, of course, is something that Donald Trump did when he was president. Not only Justin Welby, but also the Archbishop of Westminster, who's the most senior Catholic religious leader in this country. Maybe that came up in her conversation with Gove about whether he wanted to become Israel's ambassador. Only if we could move the embassy to Jerusalem. But then that wouldn't have been a sticking point because apparently that's what she wants to do. She told the Conservative Friends of Israel in a letter during the Conservative leadership campaign that's what she wanted to do, which is why they're now piping up and saying, don't do it.
She declared herself a Zionist. Is this a fight she needs to pick? Is this a hill to die on, do you think?
Well, I mean, it might distract people from some of the other issues.
She is a former foreign secretary, so she does understand international affairs.
Yeah,
and she's a self-declared Zionist.
Justin Welby came out with a slightly odd objection. He said he was concerned about the potential impact of such a move before, quote, a negotiated settlement between Palestinians and Israelis has been reached. As though that was, going to happen next week. If only it's not derailed by this rash moving of the embassy. It's like they've been trying to come to a settlement since, at least 1948, and with no success.
I might use that excuse with Mrs. Dolan. I'll say, I emptied the dishwasher once there's been a negotiated peace between the Arabs and the Israelis in the Middle East. And then I'll do the garden fence. Nick, let's have a look at this before the break.
OK.
And it's Iran and another distressing story. Yeah,
they've gone with how Gen Z became the Iranian regime's most fearsome opponent. This is about the ongoing rebellion. And it picks up on this Nika Shakarami, and she's a sort of 16-year-old they're using as an example of someone. She gave the finger to the supreme leader, and it's a kind of punk spirit rising up. But it's quite interesting because Gen Z, although we should point out that in Iran, Gen Z means they were born between 1375 and 1389. So it's quite old by our standards of Gen Z as they're getting on. But it's interesting because Iran has 60% of their population under 30. So they're kind of boomers in that sense. They're like a young, booming country, whereas they're pointing out here the establishment is very old and out of touch. And it's much like the story we did the other day, that the fear is going and this rebellion is building. And Gen Z are interesting because they are quite radical, whereas in America, they've gone fully the other way because America's so sort of woke. They've gone into sort of being like the Groypers, the sort of radical right, whereas in Iran, Gen Z are sort of, radical freedom fighters in a different way. And we also did that story yesterday about 25% of Gen Z are LGBT, according to Stonewall. So Gen Z are sort of all over the place. They're radical in various ways.
I thought that it was interesting that the way this story is framing the Iranian protests is a rebellion by Gen Z. I mean, Gen Z in Iran sound a lot more impressive than the Gen Z over here. I mean, there they are risking being arrested, being tortured, even being killed by the Iranian security services if they take off their veils, and yet they're doing it. They're being unbelievably courageous. Whereas, Gen Z over here, if you say a hurty word, it makes them feel unsafe. I mean, maybe they should go over there and learn something from these Iranian hardcore Gen Zers.
It's a different context, but there are those the millennials are very soft, but there are those Gen Zers who are on TikTok who like really robust humour. It seems to go both ways with Gen Z. But yeah, this is obviously...
What age group? Remind me the age group, Gen Z, roughly.
It's 1997 to 2012 here.
OK.
But if in Iran, a bit different. It's 1375.
Yeah, they've got the Iranian calendar.
But yeah, it's not quite you, Mark, and I'm not quite in it either. I'm a geriatric millennial. Toby's probably Gen X.
I think I'm a Gen Xer and a baby boomer. Because,
oh, really?
Yeah, born in 1963, and that's where the two overlap.
Yes, I'm similar with millennial and Gen X. Mark's ancient.
I'm on the cusp.
He's the great generation.
Which I'm receiving medical treatment for. It does hurt. That's it for part one. Coming up in part two, we've got progressive wokeness, gender mishaps, and a continuation on the Harry and Meghan saga. Headliners gold. See you in two.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, We're
on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
This is Headliners, your first look at tomorrow's papers. Tonight in the company of the highly talented journalist who has a wonderful sense of humour, Toby Young, and somebody that's got a reasonable sense of humour and has never done much journalism is Nick Dixon, but he looks good. And Nick, can I apologise to both of you, by the way, because I didn't get the memo. And if we get a wide shot of Nick and Toby, but I wasn't told that there was a dress code of white shirt and blue blazer tonight, so I'm really sorry about that.
Yeah, we always wear this at the meetings.
Nick rather high-handedly just said to me that, he said, from now on, just assume I'll be in a blue suit and just, choose something different.
Because he's got more money to buy another suit. That was my logic.
Yeah, but it looks like some kind of misguided pop impresario has put you together as some kind of ageing boy band.
Yeah, Simon Cowell's looks at us and says, this won't work as a solo act.
He's made you both wear the same outfit.
Can I say one thing, Mark?
Bros. Yeah.
One quick point. You said I'm not a journalist. I have a piece out today in Conservative Woman about Liz Truss and the decline of the grammar schools. So
you're not even a woman.
Exactly.
What are you doing taking... I mean, you're worse than
No, but
Leah
she's a
Thomas.
Conservative woman.
Did you ever identify as a woman to get that
Just for that
permission?
one piece.
Can I jump in here? The Free Speech Union had to go to bat for the Conservative woman because they discovered they were being blocked on various internet service providers. And the reason was because their content was regarded as only suitable for grown-ups. And that classification was made by the British Board of Film Classification. They gave the Conservative woman an 18 rating. So if you've got safety settings on your internet service provider, you can't get the Conservative woman.
My article is pretty hardcore.
Yeah, and I'm sure it is. Look, it's always worth reading and love that. Love all of your journalism, Nick Dixon, and your gags as well. Well, let's crack on now. And this from the Mail on Sunday. And Harry and Meghan face make or break time. Toby, what's going on?
Yes, so according to this story in the Mail, Harry and Meghan are planning a year-long thaw in relations with the rest of the royal family, but there is a caveat, which is it's not going to begin until Harry's new memoir has come out, as well as the hotly awaited Netflix series, their fly-on-the-wall documentary series. And Harry apparently has desperately been trying to lean on Penguin Random House, the publishers of his tell-all memoir, to take out some of the more critical things about the royal family, which he now thinks won't go down very well in the wake of the Queen's death. So he's trying to kind of tidy it up a bit and kind of take off some of the rougher edges in the hope that it won't torpedo this plan to reconcile with his brother and with his father. So it sounds a little bit pie in the sky to me. I can't imagine that either the Netflix documentary or the memoir will pave the way for a reconciliation with the family.
No, and there were some rumours in the press in the last 24 hours that the couple were hoping to make peace with the royal family in the weeks and months leading up to the Queen's death, so their timing wasn't brilliant there.
No. One interesting tidbit in this story in the Mail is that when Harry turned in the first draft of his memoirs, which I think it's part of a $40 million 3-book deal, so Penguin Random House want their piece of flesh, and they said they didn't like it. They asked for a rewrite because it was too touchy-feely and the focus was too much on mental health issues. So he's had to go back and spice it up a bit. Now he's trying to spice it down again, so who knows?
It's mad. They're planning a reconciliation after a bombshell memoir and Netflix series. It's like stabbing someone in the back, then dressing the wound. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't work. Why can't we just exile them like we did with Edward VIII? I mean, that worked quite well, didn't it? Just an idea. I mean, I know Harry's showing some regret and he is trying to fix his book. It's a bit late now. I love this as well, Mark. If you're worried about what was going to be in it and you're wondering, is this going to be exciting? A spokesman has said, an insider... has said this is about where they've come from, what they've been through, and where they are. I mean, isn't that the most vague nonsense ever?
Shocking. That is PR speak.
Toby, you know the world of publishing very well. You've had at least one hit book, which was How to Lose Friends and Alienate People, which became a motion picture. And you've worked in publishing for many decades. Do you think that Penguin Random House will get their money back from this investment? Or is this what they call a lost leader? It's just a sort of big-ticket signing and good for the brand? Or will they actually recoup those millions?
I doubt it. I suspect that when they entered into that deal, Harry and Meghan were riding high. Their public reputation, particularly in America, was much higher than it is now. I mean, essentially, I think they had a lot of goodwill, particularly in America, which they've squandered since he signed that deal. So if I was, running Penguin Random House, I'd be thinking about how to get out of it.
Yeah. Have a look at that contract and the small print. Because it's the same in politics with political biographies. Autobiographies are really boring and self-congratulatory, and then the biographies, people like Tom Bower and the like, always very entertaining.
Yes, I mean, what made, I think, How to Lose Friends and Alienate People an
cracking read,
international bestseller, is that I was very self-deprecating. You know, I put myself down on virtually every.
You got a big job in publishing in New York in a magazine.
I worked for Vanity Fair, and the book was really about my failure to take Manhattan. You know, I thought I'd have the Big Apple eating out of the palm of my hand, but I was essentially gobbled up by the Big Apple. It was the land of the unreturned phone call for me, and. So I wrote this very self-deprecating memoir, a humorous memoir, but I can't see Harry. But I think that's why, you know, biographies sell better than autobiographies generally, because they're a lot ruder about the subject. But if you're rude about yourself, you can kind of, you know, you might get a few sales that way. And I don't think Harry's going to do that. Who knows?
No, I'm not sure that's in his makeup these days. On to Sunday's Telegraph and progressive wokeness. Nick, your favourite topic?
Absolutely, and this is about someone I actually know. So, Abolish Arts Council and its left-wing woke agenda, say critics. And one of them is Alexander Adams, who I know, I've met him here several times, got lots of mutual friends. Also, David Lee. And they've come up with this pamphlet titled Abolish the Arts Council, quite an unambiguous title there. I like what they've done. And they're saying that good artists have given up patience because they have been shut out of the system for not conforming to Arts Council England's left-wing agenda. So Arts Council England has become an obstacle to the arts in this country. They say that it's got a suffocating political monoculture where administrators are disproportionately left-wing, anti-Brexit and anti-monarchy. Sounds a bit like the comedy world, doesn't it? And a lot of these places. And they point out that the Arts Council got 690 million in a year. And the whole point is, it's not a place that the arts can thrive. It's just a woke echo chamber, and we're paying for it. And I would add, it's not in this, but I would add there was that recent piece from the Artichoke Trust, who received a percentage of their funding from the Arts Council, which was that bizarre banner, that sort of mini statue thing that popped up in Southwark saying straight white men pass the power. So we actually paid to have a racist art insulting us, racist and sexist art. Yes. So I think everyone's had enough of that, and they're saying it's time to get rid.
It's not really art, really, so much as sort of Soviet-style political propaganda, isn't it? And I was reminded of the letter that 20 Conservative MPs, more than 20 Tory MPs, wrote to Nadine Dorries earlier this year, in which they asked for the Arts Council to look into the fact that all these companies applying for Arts Council funding, up to 400 million, were expected to sign up to this international campaign that included the requirement that the people asking for the money unlearn their whiteness. You had to unlearning whiteness was the big theme of this campaign, and unless you signed up to it, you couldn't get Arts Council funding. So, yeah, I think these guys might be onto something.
Would they like physical evidence as well, perhaps? Some effort to just be less white?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I think if you are a white heteronormative male, you know, you might be the best opera singer in the country, but your chances of getting an Arts Council grant are pretty low.
Well, yeah. Speaking of grants, I mean, that's the issue when it comes to these culture wars, Nick. A lot of critics of woke culture say that capitalism will win. If you look at the popularity of Joe Rogan's podcast, the most watched and listened to talk show in America now, 11 million downloads a week, I think, much more than regular TV. So the idea is capitalism will kill wokeism in the end, because it's just, you know, it's democratic. People will vote with their remote controls, they'll vote with their wallet. But the issue here is that these woke institutions are being funded not by customers, but by government handouts.
Exactly, so it can continue indefinitely, and it's the same with the BBC. They take our money via the licence fee, so their shows don't have to be.
So go woke, go broke doesn't work for them.
Doesn't work for them, and arguably the left like to say, well, it's all capitalism, and they wouldn't put out movies that were woke, for example. But it's obviously not true. What happens is people lower down are just very woke. Then occasionally someone higher up, like we saw with, was it Batgirl that just got cancelled recently? Didn't even put it out. It's one of those things. But for the most part, we do actually see woke stuff come out, and it just loses loads of money, and that can happen quite a few times before someone actually shuts it down. Don't you think?
Yeah, I think, clearly, go woke, go broke doesn't work if, you know, you're not relying on sales, but just the largesse of the Arts Council.
Too right. OK, well, moving on, the Mail on Sunday. And Musk got the memo to blame woke people, Toby. What's going on there?
Yes, so in an interview with the Financial Times, the world's richest man has blamed neo-Marxists in elite private schools and universities in the United States for the estrangement between him and his daughter. He said it was full-on communism and a general sentiment, the sentiment that if you're rich, you're evil. So this is because he has become estranged from his daughter, who was born a biological male, but has submitted a legal petition to change her name and her gender. He's clearly quite troubled by this. And you know, she's clearly not going to see eye to eye with him. He famously tweeted, "Pronouns suck," earlier this year, so not on board with having to declare your gender pronouns in the workplace.
Very interesting, the journey he's been on, Toby, because he's a little bit like the American comedian Bill Maher, and perhaps a few figures in this country as well, who traditionally and historically have been to the left, well, it would be called liberals in America, or sort of more or less lefties, you know, social democratic supporters of that sort of, you know, sort of left position. And they've been made right-wing, not because necessarily they've changed, but the world has.
That's right. There's a great cartoon done by a former colleague of mine called Colin Wright, colleague on Quillette magazine, where we both used to work, in which he himself thinks of himself as a sort of centre-left social democrat. And, you know, he hasn't moved. And in this cartoon, you see this stick man remaining in one place. And, you know, the Overton window just shifts more and more leftwards until the people that used to be on, you know, in the same place as him politically have now shifted so far to the left. They're now pointing at him and calling him a bigot. And as far as they're concerned, he's right-wing because he hasn't shifted to the left with them. And the same goes, I think, for Bill Maher and Elon Musk. It's sort of it's not that they've been red-pilled, it's just that the left has gone completely off the deep end and now thinks of them as alt-right bigots, when actually they're basically Democrats.
And J.K. Rowling tweeted just that in the last few hours, that she's been a left-leaning Labour supporter all of her adult life, and therefore to worry about child welfare and sex-based rights, it doesn't make you right-wing.
Yeah, I mean,
according to critics, it does.
It's great to have J.K. Rowling on our side in these kind of woke culture wars. My worry is that, you know, when we win the culture wars, I think we inevitably will, we'll go back to having to be antagonists with all these people who are currently enjoying this kind of, you know, football in, you know, neutral ground during the First World War. I love playing football with J.K. Rowling, you know, on Christmas Day in 1914, but I don't want to go back to throwing custard pies.
I'm a Spurs fan, so anyone that's playing Arsenal, suddenly my favourite team. Really briefly, Nick, is Elon Musk's deal to buy Twitter back on?
Well, yeah, I heard it was back on the other day. If you really briefly, yes, maybe.
Yeah, Toby, you heard anything?
Yes, supposedly.
Because you are the founder of the Free Speech Union, and I would have thought you would be pinning your hopes on this acquisition going through.
Yes, I think I was incredibly pleased when Musk announced that he was going to buy Twitter, disappointed when the deal appeared to be off the table, and I'm happy that it's now back on. And one of the things he says he'll do is restore a lot of people who've been kicked off Twitter, restore their accounts, including, I imagine, President Trump. And that can only be a good thing, not because I'm a huge fan of Trump's, but because, you know, we need a platform where people from all different political sides can get together and have a lively debate, not just, you know, cleanse them and have two different platforms, one woke and one non-woke. So I think it's a great source of hope.
No, too right. Well, look, sticking with the Mail, and Kanye is making headlines again, Nick. Kanye West. He's changed his name, hasn't he?
Yeah, well, sometimes he's called Ye now. But speaking of Trump, they've gone with watch out Trump. Kanye shares fresh hints he'll run for president again with snap of a 2024 baseball cap after blasting wokeness. So there's a picture on his Twitter, a black cap, just said 2024. And so, yes, he's potentially back. He's just done this brilliant interview with Tucker Carlson where he said he had an audience of one, and that's God. He said he was pro-life. He said the media's pursuing a godless agenda. All these absolutely brilliant truth bombs from Kanye. Of course, he just did the whatever you want to call it, stunt or launch where he had the White Lives Matter shirts, which we talked about, which was very interesting as well. And, yeah, so it looks like he could run again, although apparently he was having some trouble with Instagram. His Instagram still seemed to be up, but he had a tweet out saying that Zuckerberg had kicked him off Instagram, and he was showing him and Zuckerberg doing karaoke, saying, Zuck, what have you done to me? And bizarrely, that was retweeted by Dominic Cummings. So the world's just getting stranger and stranger. But they failed to cancel him. He points out here, this whole yay is crazy doesn't work. And that's the thing, anytime you're bold and you come out in favour of Trump or you say something controversial, especially if you're black in America, you're not supposed to have those views, they say, oh, he's mentally ill. But it hasn't worked. He's back. And he also said an interesting thing, that Jared Kushner was not who he thought, and he said he didn't handle Trump well, which I think a lot of people agree with. So very interesting interview with Tucker Carlson. You should check that out. And yeah, he may be back, although he would take votes off Trump, I suppose. So that's the side that's not ideal. And I do want to say, actually, Toby, you predicted this the other day, didn't you?
I did.
You said, because they were there with the White Lives Matter tops, Candace Owens and Kanye West, and I just said it was a great gesture, and it was provocative, and it was great. But Toby said they're positioning themselves to run, and he was completely right.
Yes, it looks like he's quite serious about making a bid for the presidency in 2024, and Candace Owens might well be his running mate.
Who's a political commentator?
She's an African-American conservative political commentator, and quite outspoken. And
she wore the same T-shirt, White Lives Matter.
Exactly the same T-shirt. And I remember I had dinner with Candace when she was in London last year, and I said, so are you going to be Kanye West's vice presidential running mate? And she was like, are you kidding? He's going to be my vice presidential running mate. I'm running for president, so who knows?
Fascinating stuff. Well, lots more to come in our final part. We have high-fiving disrespect, stressed out fish, and true love with a sex doll. We've all been there. See you in 2.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back to Headliners, your first look at tomorrow's papers with me, Mark Dolan, and the brilliant journalist and wit, Toby Young, and broadcaster, comedian. He's a triple threat. It's Nick Dixon.
And writer.
Too right. So I'm told. Sunday's Mail now, the Mail on Sunday, and the Beckham-Qatari saga continues, Nick.
Oh, we're going to go this one. Yeah. Being gay is against human nature, but enough of my views. Let's crack on with this show. So this is I don't know why do I do these things to myself? This is shocking views of Qatari teacher who acted as David Beckham's interpreter in glossy promo for World Cup host nation. So we know that Beckham has been in a bit of hot water because he took a £150 million deal over 10 years to promote Qatar. People are saying, is this great, David? We know you queued up in the Queen's queue, but this is maybe not the best PR for you. And so this is a little bit tenuous because he went to meet this Madam Shams, and she's a sort of entrepreneur who's very popular with celebrities. And but her daughter, Eman, was the interpreter. And she was asked about homosexuality. They were having a nice chat with her. They asked her, and she suddenly blurted out, no, that's not acceptable. Homosexuality goes against human nature, it goes against science, and it goes against our culture. We are not animals here. And so, not ideal,
but... So basically she was Nick Dixon in a burqa.
Yeah, exactly, essentially. And she Now, you could say, well, it's quite a tenuous link to David Beckham, this, person he met's daughter as the interpreter. Then again, if you are going to promote Qatar, that's the kind of thing that's going to happen, isn't it? Because that's the kind of thing people are going to say. So he has kind of walked into it.
Yeah, and one imagines that this isn't going to be the first time, his own progressive liberal views are going to run up against some of the views he encounters amongst the people he's having to kind of glad hand in Qatar in his role as a kind of £150 million shill.
Yeah, do you think that gig was one sponsorship too far for Beckham? Will it damage his brand, do you think?
I'm pretty troubled, actually, by the involvement of all these footballing grandees, who style themselves as progressive and who supposedly care about LGBT rights, wear rainbow laces and the rest of it, suddenly kind of getting into bed with the Qatari regime, where homosexuality is still illegal and, I believe, punishable by death. I mean, it's, at some point, don't they draw the line somewhere?
Gary Neville was particularly disappointing. I mean, Man United hero of mine growing up, like David Beckham, but then Gary Neville signed up to a TV deal in Qatar
with
now.
beIN Sport, which is the state-owned national broadcaster.
Yeah, and he's a big Labour right-on guy. And what's he going to be doing, like, in the commentary, saying, well, that was a weak effort, Martin. Frankly, it reminded me of homosexuality's attempts to subvert the patriarchal culture. How far is he going to have to go to appease these people?
Let's have a look at The Independent and another world-class footballer. What's happened this time, Toby?
So Rio Ferdinand has weighed in and said that he thinks the government should not only pass the online safety bill as quickly as possible, but make it even tougher in order to protect female football players from misogynistic abuse on Twitter. And I have to say, I don't really buy this argument that the government needs to strengthen the online safety bill in order to protect footballers from abuse on Twitter. I mean, one thing we learned during the imbroglio about all the racist abuse the England football players got just after the World Cup is that 70% of the abusive messages were from people outside the United Kingdom. So toughening up our laws won't make any difference from that point of view. And also, it's already against the law to abuse footballers in the racist way that some of them were abused after the World Cup. I mean, there was that teenager who was sentenced to 6 weeks in jail, I think, for racially abusing Marcus Rashford on Twitter. So that's not a good argument for bringing in a new law.
And, of course, all of those examples are horrific. We can all agree on that. But it's funny how the elite are very relaxed about freedom of speech, aren't they? And they're not afraid to lose it.
Yeah,
because that's the implication of this law being too robust. I was reading your Daily Sceptic newspaper online today, and one of your writers, or it might have been you or a colleague, said that the focus of this bill this legislation should be on children.
That's right. It should become the children's online safety bill, and they should not bother with trying to protect adults from legal but harmful content, as if we're too stupid, too infantile to judge for ourselves what's dangerous and what isn't, and what we can cope with and what we can't. The idea that the state has to intervene to protect us from legal content, I just think is completely wrong.
Yes, Nick Dixon, you can be trusted to watch Russell Brand on your own in your living room, can't you?
Not really, Mark. It's a bad example. I get too carried away, but you could have used anyone else.
You're only human.
I know. He's a charismatic guy, but yeah, I understand Rio Ferdinand's point because no one likes social media abuse. I get it. Toby gets far, far more. You probably get the most of all of us, Mark. But
yeah, but
at the same time,
it's my meal ticket.
But it doesn't mean we should be cracking down and using censorship. And also, women's football. Yes, you shouldn't be abusing people. That's horrible. But it is a bit weird. Like you're not allowed to even criticise women's football. I criticised it on the show. I said this before. Free Speech Nation, and was hissed by the audience of Free Speech Nation for saying I didn't like women's football. So it's the current thing you're not allowed to criticise.
Yeah.
But of course, there's a line between that and abuse.
Yeah, just not watching women's football on
It's a hate crime.
That'll be a hate crime.
Yeah, I mean, just look at what the abuse male footballers get, and that's part of sort of, the culture of football crowds. And I would say it was ever thus, and I wouldn't change that. It's the essence of football,
Yeah.
Unless it's vile, racist abuse or something. But to yell obscenities at Cristiano Ronaldo for missing a free kick is fair game.
True, that is part of the culture of football. Online is like a nasty extra element because they can never escape it. I think the ground, fair enough, but it's the online stuff. But doesn't mean we should use censorship.
Let's power through a few more because we've got some gold waiting in the wings. This from The Observer. and time to drop a line for these stressed fish.
Yeah, the fish story is gold. Yeah, so this is about fish feeling pain. Now, in my generation, we were taught that it's OK to eat fish because they don't have any feelings. That was Professor Kurt Cobain, if you remember that song. But now it turns out farmed fish do feel pain, stress and anxiety and must be killed humanely. The Aquaculture Stewardship Council, as you'll know this, Toby, have said that we need to kill them in a more humane way. And I understand the point. They're saying they can't be eviscerated anymore, and they can't be. They need to be stunned first rather than eviscerated or asphyxiated. And they're saying that basically fish are like people, really. They can navigate mazes, they have numerical skills, quite shockingly, and have complicated relationships. So they should be treated like you or I, Toby, or slightly better, probably.
Yeah. This sort of animal rights argument I've always found unpersuasive, because if it's really true that animals have feelings and should be, therefore, protected from predators like us, why then shouldn't they be protected from other predators in the animal kingdom? I mean, you know, what about the fish that are eaten by other larger fish? Should we worry about them too?
Right.
Why is it?
They're not
why are we
first.
being singled out as the species which needs to stun them first? Why don't dolphins have to stun the tuna fish before they gobble them up? I can't imagine that's very pleasant if they really do have feelings.
Dolphins are the real predators, and they need to be. They're the Me Too scandal of dolphins needs to be looked at.
We're always talking about saving the whale. What about the plankton?
Too right. Toby, I bet you do a great high five.
Yes, so this is a reference, Mark, to a story in the Mirror in which this American family psychologist, John Rosamond, he styles himself a parenting expert, has advised parents that they shouldn't high-five their children. He thinks it's too matey, it doesn't have the right tone, it doesn't encourage children to respect their parents and obey them, and he says the happiest children are the most obedient children. And the Mirror claims that this has caused a huge controversy, but what they mean by that is that he said this on Twitter, and then there are a couple of things. I mean, you see these stories in the papers all the time now. They bill something as a massive controversy, and all they're talking about is a few dissenting tweets beneath the slightly controversial statement, and that seems to be the case here. I mean, you know, I wouldn't style myself a parenting expert, but I am the father of 4 teenagers, and the reason I don't high-five them is because they would think it was hopelessly outdated and take the mickey out of me for being uncool. It's fist bumps in our house.
What about that fine line between being the parent and being the friend? Where are you on that spectrum?
Yeah, I'm neither. No, I do think that parents that try and be, you know, their kid's best friend are probably not doing the job properly.
Yeah,
it's lame. It's Americanised as well, the high five. I think it's American, it's lame. I think parents should address their father as sir, and we should go back to all of those things. It says here, happiest kids are the most obedient. I agree. Let's go back to Victorian discipline. That's my position.
I remember I was in a street market in East London, and I was just courting Mrs. Dolan. We were just dating. We didn't have kids at that point.
But she was still called Mrs. Dolan, that's odd.
I know, that's a bit odd, wasn't it? And she bought some Brussels sprouts or something, and he handed the bag to her, and he's a lovely old-school Cockney. He just said, "Thanks, Mum," like that. And it's basically, if you're a woman, you're basically a mum.
Right.
Right. She was probably about 23 at the time, so, you know, old school. That's what we like. Moving on to the Times, and I bet you couldn't tell the time as a kid either, Nick.
Not really. So this is analog clocks are a test for exam pupils, and it's saying that these days students have trouble understanding a traditional clock face, and they're baffled by it. And it is pretty laughable in a sense. But then again, look, it is a decline of education. I did write an article about this today in Conservative Woman you can check out. But at the same time, I sympathise. As a child of the 80s, I preferred the digital clock, you know, the Casio digital watch. That's what we grew up with. And so I actually, even though it goes against all my typical reactionary things I say, I actually sympathise that if you're in an exam, you don't want to be, like, working out the time. So I kind of get this.
I was a bit, you know, I thought if these kids can't tell the time by looking at a traditional clock face, maybe they're not ready to sit their GCSE.
It's a fair point, listen, we had better crack on because it's 4:10. This from the... Thanks, you're welcome. Just relax and enjoy that for a minute. This from the Mirror, and a not-so-big reveal from Graham Norton on Eurovision, Toby.
Yeah, so Graham Norton was on a special edition of The One Show on Friday, in which his job was to reveal the location of the next Eurovision Song Contest. Was it going to be in Liverpool or was it going to be in Glasgow? And he drew the moment out as long as he could, and he opened the envelope, pulled out the card, held it up and said, and sort of, you know, teased the audience about how he wasn't going to reveal it straight away, not realising that it said on the back of the card, facing the camera, the next Eurovision Song Contest is going to be in Liverpool. So everyone knew as he kind of tried to tease them and prolong the moment. So made a bit of a fool of himself.
A bit of a boo-boo. OK, let's have a look now at this story, and it wouldn't be headliners without an article from the Daily Star on sex dolls. Nick, it's all yours.
Right. Sex doll owners admit they've fallen in love with silicone that can't hurt them. So according to research, approximately half of sex doll owners said they considered their doll to be the ideal partner, but the other half were let down. That's a kind of a pun that I've gone for there. Didn't really work, but the viewers at home may get that, you know, if they watch it again.
Do you feel a bit deflated?
Yeah, I think it's a grower, that one.
So they questioned 217 doll users, Mark. They're called doll users, and some of them just wanted to use the dolls as sex toys in a monstrous way, but other ones actually fell in love with them. They responded and said things like, I'm in love with my doll, and having a sex doll improved my mental health, and so on. And these were the ones, of course, more likely to be single or divorced, which is where it gets a little bit tragic and sad. And, of course, 91.7% of them were men. I'm surprised it wasn't higher.
Surprised it wasn't higher, yeah. But one interesting figure, 2.3% are women and 2.3% are non-binary. I'm sort of thinking, what's doll do you go for?
Well, the choice is incredible. I was actually looking online at some of the options you can get, and there's one which is like sort of the wife's sex doll, which is basically very voluptuous and has added nagging. There's a nagging button. So,
really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was just like basically moaning about little things, like the mess you've made of the bedroom and leaving wet towels on the bed. So, you know, very authentic, Nick.
Yeah.
Could you, I mean, there's no replacement for Mrs. Young, of course, but could you imagine being amorous with a
non-binary sex doll?
There you go.
I don't know, I might struggle, actually, but Nick, have you found
Nick, have you ever been...
I find it perfectly fine, but what's very peaceful. What's disturbing for me is that the youngest participant was 18 and the oldest was 77. Who are these? It's tragic on both ends, isn't it, really? Yeah. You imagine a sort of 30-year-old bloke who's on the internet a lot, but an 18-year-old turned into it, and a 77-year-old, both are sad.
Yeah, 18-year-olds, it's giving up a little early, isn't it?
Yeah, whereas mine is just normal.
Yeah, knowing my luck, I'd buy one of these expensive sex dolls and it would be like, sorry, you're not really my type. See us more as friends. You know what I mean? I basically get... Yeah. I would buy the world's only frigid sex doll.
Yeah, no, she would continue to nag, but the other bits wouldn't work.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Off games.
Eerily familiar. Gentlemen, brilliant debate and some cracking laughs along the way. My thanks to Toby Young and Nick Dixon. Do check out Nick's article in The Conservative Woman and check out Toby Young's brilliant website, The Daily Skeptic.
And the Weekly Skeptic podcast.
Oh, yeah!
We do together now.
I mean, basically, the gold you've watched for the last hour, go to any... podcast option, and it's the Weekly Skeptic podcast, and it's well worth a listen. 2 gems, and they'll be back soon. Thanks to your company and the team for working so hard today. I'll see you tomorrow at 9. Headliners back at 11. See you then.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
On Mark Dolan Tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me from 9 p.m. to midnight every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good evening, it's 6 o'clock and I'm Liam Halligan, standing in for Neil Oliver, who sends you all his greetings from Bonnie, Scotland. Tonight we're looking back on a tumultuous week of economics and politics. The pound went on a rollercoaster ride as the Tory faithful gathered for their annual party conference in Birmingham, the first with Liz Truss as Prime Minister. The government then U-turned, scrapping its plans to cut the top rate of tax from 45 to 40 pence. For the top 2% of earners amidst a political backlash. Hardly surprising during a cost of living crisis. I'll be joined this next hour by financial analyst extraordinaire Justin Urquhart-Stewart, GB News' very own answer to Gordon Gekko, and also Victoria Scholar of Interactive Investor, grown-up discussions with bags of personality. All that and more coming up after the GB News headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Thank you, Liam. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. 10 people have died, including a primary school girl, in an explosion at a service station in County Donegal in Ireland. 4 men, 3 women and 2 teenagers have also died. It's understood the petrol station was the hub of the tight-knit village of Creesler. Northern Ireland's Fire and Rescue Service crossed the border to assist with the search and rescue efforts. Emergency services are still helping with the recovery mission, having already worked through the night. Irish police believe the blast was an accident, but aren't ruling out other causes.
At this point in time, we have to keep an open mind as a police service and how we investigate this. But our information at this point in time is pointing towards a tragic accident. That said, being a Garda, I have to take a holistic and overall viewpoint, but that's where we're going at the moment.
Member of the House of Lords and former Deputy Leader of the DUP, Lord Nigel Dodds, has called the incident horrendous.
One of us can relate to calling into a filling station or wanting to call in and get some groceries or a snack or something, and to be caught up in something like this is just horrendous. And when you hear those who've died include men, women, teenagers, a young child, it really is awful. Our hearts and prayers are with the bereaved of those who have lost their lives, and obviously hope and pray that those that have been injured make a swift recovery.
In other news, the serial killer Peter Tobin has died after becoming unwell in prison. He was taken to hospital from HMP Edinburgh, where he was serving 3 life sentences for the rape and murder of Polish student Angelika Kluk and the murders of teenagers Vicky Hamilton and Dinah McNichol in 1991. Their bodies were found buried in the garden of his former home in Margate in Kent 17 years later. Police questioned Tobin about other murders they believe he may have committed, but he refused to give any details. The UK has exported lamb to the United States for the first time since 1989. The Prime Minister has hailed the move a milestone after President Joe Biden lifted the decades-old ban on British meat imports in September last year. The market is worth an estimated £37 million in the first 5 years of trade. Celebrating the news on Twitter, Liz Truss said the move marks a well-deserved boost to our rural economy. Only around 1 in 5 trains are running today across Scotland, England and Wales. Members of the RMT union are staging their 8th strike this year in a long-running dispute over pay and conditions. The train operator's chief negotiator, Tim Shoveler, says passengers should only travel by train if absolutely necessary. RMT's General Secretary Mick Lynch has warned of further strikes to come. A large explosion has seriously damaged the only road and rail bridge linking the occupied Crimean Peninsula to Russia. Russian authorities say 3 people have died in the blast on the Kerch Bridge, but it's not yet clear if it was a deliberate attack. Ukraine haven't claimed responsibility. The bridge, which is the longest in Europe, is crucial to supplying the peninsula and Russian forces across Ukraine. Moscow says the train line is now reopened and large queues of cars and buses have started crossing again. And thousands of people have formed a human chain around Parliament calling for the release of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. Mr. Assange is currently being held in London's Belmarsh prison amid a legal battle to avoid extradition to the US, where he could face a prison sentence of up to 175 years. He's wanted in America over the leak of secret military information. Former PR advisor Richard Hillgrove says it's important for journalism that Assange is freed.
The fact that this is being led not so much from Don't Extradite Assange again, but the National Union of Journalists and the International Federation of Journalists, which has 600,000 members globally, leading this exercise means, the penny is dropping that this is not, this is political. This puts journalism in the firing line. If Assange goes down, journalism goes down.
TV online and DAB Plus Radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Liam Halligan.
Liz Truss was in Birmingham this week for her first conference as Conservative Party leader and Prime Minister. She put on a brave face. My priorities are growth, growth and growth, Truss declared, channeling perhaps Tony Blair's education, education, education speech in 1997, his first as a Labour Prime Minister. The opponents of growth, the vested interests, the forces of decline are wrong, 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 Truss told the party faithful in a definite throwback to another Prime Minister's words. For it was in 1990, responding to Brussels' attempts further to dilute UK sovereignty, that Margaret Thatcher insisted no, no, no from the House of Commons dispatch box, as every true blue Conservative knows. Rather than the Iron Lady, though, Truss has come across as politically tin-eared after she and Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng tried to lower the top 45% rate of additional income tax to 40%, a tax cut for the top 2% of earners only, those on more than £150 a year in the midst of an escalating cost of living crisis. Truss and Kwarteng were forced into a U-turn during their own conference, scrapping that move to a 40% top rate after Tory tax cuts were blamed for serious jitters on currency and debt markets, with the pound tumbling and government borrowing costs sharply up, a trend that rippled out across the economy, causing mortgage and pension panic. This new Prime Minister and her senior team, they're now desperate to make amends, to assert themselves and their pro-growth supply-side agenda on their party and the broader country, cutting back regulation and taxes in a bid to get the British economy moving. The reality is, though, that the trajectory of the economy, and with it not just the government's survival, but the prosperity of thousands of firms and millions of households across the UK, now depends largely on market and broader financial forces, which are way beyond any politician's control. Cast your mind back, if you're old enough, to the 2008 global financial crisis, a time when the entire world economy was upended due to the reckless activities of out-of-control investment banks, not least in the UK and US. Financiers in the city, on Wall Street and elsewhere, they borrowed billions to place huge bets on increasingly dubious investments, so complex almost no one understood them, knowing that governments, taxpayers would be forced to bail them out to avoid a full-scale banking collapse, with all the disastrous economic and political turmoil, to say nothing of the civic unrest that would cause. Such investment banks, having grown to a gargantuan size as regulators turned a blind eye, were too big to fail, don't you know? The sharp-suited bosses running them specialised in heads I win, tails you lose activity, the kind that gives capitalism a bad name. At the end of 2008 and into 2009, the financial crisis was so serious that merely cutting interest rates to reboot the global economy was deemed insufficient. The Bank of England, along with the Federal Reserve and other leading central banks, they launched a one-off programme called Quantitative Easing, or QE, creating money out of nothing, then injecting it into the financial system to avoid a disastrous banking collapse. But the UK's initial £50 billion QE rescue scheme, meant to last just a few months, it grew like Topsy. Central bank largesse, it juiced up share prices. It was used to buy government bonds, meaning the state could borrow more cheaply. Investment banks and successive governments, a powerful combination, they became addicted as QE morphed into the economic equivalent of crack cocaine. The emergency measures meant to be temporary from 2009, morphing into a lifestyle choice. By early 2020, the UK's QE programme had ballooned from 50 billion of money creation to 425 billion, 8 times the original plan. By pushing up share prices and shielding ministers from really tough spending decisions, QE has friends in high places. Perhaps that's why it's come under so little scrutiny, barely debated in Parliament, with almost the entire media taking it completely for granted. Yet by boosting stock and property prices, QE's made the asset-rich richer still, and housing even less affordable for countless ordinary families. And those related ultra-low interest rates, they've meanwhile punished tens of millions of savers. The reality is, though, that QE is deeply counterproductive. Hosing economies down with liquidity doesn't make them grow faster. That's a bit like trying to get fat by buying a bigger belt. QE's also skewed bank lending towards incumbent zombie companies, starving smaller dynamic firms of finance, the kind that really boosts growth. And many real-world investors, meanwhile, those growing businesses, rather than engaged in financial engineering, they've been so spooked by the monetary madness of recent years, they've kept serious money off the table, stymieing growth even more. And on top of all that, the more QE's been used to pump up financial markets, making shares and other assets artificially expensive, the harder it's become to stop the mass money printing without sparking another meltdown, with all the related economic and political carnage. And that's the huge danger, that years of grotesquely excessive QE have set us up for collapse. But if QE was excessive before COVID, it went into overdrive during the pandemic, for it was QE that largely paid for lockdown. As the government struggled to fund furlough and business support loans, the state issued IOUs like confetti, many bought up by the Bank of England. Our money printing programme duly expanded by another 450 billion to an astonishing 875 billion pounds in total. That's 6 times the annual NHS budget created out of thin air, with more QE happening during the year and a half of lockdown than during the whole of the previous decade. And now, as inflation has finally punched through, this QE-driven stock market, bond market, Ponzi scheme, it's starting to look quite shaky. Across the world, interest rates are rising, and that will continue as we retreat from the ultra-low levels which have prevailed since 2008. No politician, no central banker either can stop that happening. This is an inconvenient truth which no one wants to admit, certainly not the likes of the International Monetary Fund and the central bankers who oversaw QE. Better to blame the UK's recent financial turmoil on an incoming government, one led by a politically vulnerable Prime Minister with only lukewarm support from her own MPs. Now, don't get me wrong here. There was much to criticise in the government's mini-budget. To lower the top tax rates with a tough winter looming, with millions worrying how to make ends meet, was spectacularly bad timing. But the idea this unfunded tax cut crashed the pound is absurd. Lowering the top rate cost the state around £2 billion, a rounding error amongst almost £900 billion of government revenue. Lowering the top rate could even make the state money, given the impact on work incentives. That, though, is now the accepted political narrative that a greed-driven Tory government drove down sterling while causing borrowing costs to spike, the higher borrowing costs rippling across the economy, damaging hard-working families and firms. And it's a narrative this Truss government will struggle to shake off, all because of a lack of political nous. But the broader truth is this. Our financiers and central bankers in cahoots with placid governments has created an almighty financial bubble, supported by mass money printing and ultra-low interest rates. And as we finally retreat from that, and the QE bubble-blowing machine is turned off, borrowing costs inevitably will rise as the cheap credit era comes to an end. This is not an easy message, but it's one we can hardly avoid. We are in for a period of painful adjustment, a truth our political and media class must urgently start to explain. So what do you think? How are rising interest rates impacting you and your family? And who do you blame for rates going up? The government, greedy investors, or are these rises inevitable as we retreat from years of ultra-low interest rates? Email me here at gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet at GBNews. We'll read out some of your comments later in the show. Justin Urquhart-Stewart, you are an extremely experienced person when it comes to financial markets, as are you, Victoria Scholar. We've both had chats on GB News many, many times. Thank you so much for coming in early Saturday evening to join me here as we attempt, all of us in our way, to cover for the fantastic Neil Oliver. Justin, you and I have talked about QE a lot over the years. To what extent do you think what we're really seeing here is the end of an era rather than a response to a single mini-budget statement?
Well, it certainly feels like one, and probably deserves to be one. Because as you perfectly explained in that wonderful review of everything, QE was brought in to solve a particular issue, an emergency. And from that, and I remember when we finished that first 50 billion, turning around to some of the people saying, well, presumably we couldn't do that again, could we? Oh, no, we can't do that again. That's impossible. And there you described, it went on
we
again.
do it 8 times more.
Absolutely. And it became, we were addicted to this thing. And to the next generation coming through, particularly of those in the finance and politics of finance, actually say, well, it's magic money, it's fine, it works. Nothing's gone wrong with it, we'll carry on doing it. And no one thought about the end game, and those who sat there and thought about, eventually, this has to be paid for. And, of course, also, interest rates are low. No, as you said, they're ultra low. They've got to get back to real rates. And you talk to people now about actually getting back to real rates, they start sucking through their teeth and say, I can't afford that, because they've been used to the amount of rates pushed so low down. So this is a change.
Victoria Scholar, you're not here to talk about politics. You are very much into finance. You look at spreadsheets and yield curves and all the rest of it. But I know you do have a good sense of history from our previous discussions. Just put in historic context, Victoria, the last couple of weeks. It's been pretty financially turbulent, hasn't it? And it has followed that mini-budget statement on the 23rd of September.
Yeah, and I do think that the mini-budget statement does have something to do with it, given the sharp movement that we saw in the pound, which hit a record low on the Monday after the Friday when the announcement came out. And we also saw that dysfunction in the gilt market, which forced the Bank of England...
The market for government debt.
Government debt market, exactly, that forced the Bank of England to step in with that emergency intervention to save some of the biggest pension funds, which were understood to be on the brink of collapse. But to put it into a broader picture, like you say, this is a shift away from ultra-low interest rates. And that's been the case since essentially the end of last year, when we got the revival of inflation post-pandemic. And the reason why they've been able to keep interest rates that low for that long is because we haven't been forced with a picture in which we're dealing with inflation. But now, post-COVID, it's reared its ugly head, and interest rates have no choice but to go up to try and curtail price levels and bring inflation, which is now almost at double digits, back down to the Bank of England's target, which is just 2%.
Of course, inflation, Justin, this is all about the cost of living. Inflation, as Victoria said, it's currently 9.9%. It's come down a little bit, but it's still very, very high. Bank of England's target is 2%. Crikey. To what extent do you think, though, that mini budget statement, just to slightly push back against Victoria at my peril, it was the spark, it was the catalyst rather than the cause of these big movements? I'm not here to, stand up for the Tories or Kwasi Kwarteng. I'm coming at this as a sort of economist, as an analyst, trying to explain to people at home who are worried about rising interest rates, worried about paying their bills, where this is actually coming from.
Yeah, the 45p rate cancellation was irrelevant. It makes for a headline. Tories get embarrassed because they've had to rein back on it.
Pretty inept, though, politically, the timing, right?
And it is that, and it's almost looking back at politicians trying to play. No, I'm Margaret Thatcher and I'm big and butch.
I've got the train set now. I'm going to lower it. They're only lowering it to it was 40% under Blair, and the whole of Blair and most of Brown's government, the top rate of tax was 40% under Labour. So it's hardly a sort of extreme policy.
No, and also this idea that I've got to be big and determined and I've no turning. Well, hang on a second. Mrs. Thatcher did turn several times, because sometimes she actually realised, whoa, I'm going to wait here. I can't take on the miners now because I don't have enough coal. I've actually worked out that actually I'm going to...
Showing his age.
All this, well, it goes back that far, making sure that the days of monetary policy need to be changed round as well. She had to reverse on that one. But she's known for actually saying no, no, no. Well, she adjusted and changed. In the last few years, she forgot how to change, and actually that was probably her fall, dealing with the taxes then. But nonetheless, there's somehow the feeling that you have to be big and butch, and if I do be dynamic and I'm decisive, that actually all make it well. Markets don't work like that.
Our former Lib Dem Prime Minister perhaps a bit too keen to demonstrate her Thatcherite credentials.
Absolutely.
Has that cost us?
Yes, it has cost us. And there's one thing as well. Was one thing and maybe this is why you didn't call it. They didn't call it a budget. You do not, if you've got a financial statement, go and actually talk to all the banks and fund managers and things like that the night before. You're supposed to be in purdah. You keep quiet. And you talk to those people, including some of the short sellers, who have actually, Kwasi Kwarteng used to work, one of them.
He did.
And then, lo and behold, the following day, there are short sales done almost immediately. And you think, well, stone me. And obviously, that's probably why it's not a budget.
Hold that thought, Justin and Victoria. We will return to this after the break. We'll also be joined by an economist called Gerard Lyons, who is an extremely influential person these days. He criticized Boris Johnson, and he's been whispering into Liz Truss's ear. We'll be looking at why interest rates are rising. Stay with us here on Neil Oliver Live.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens,
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
It's 6:23. Welcome back to Neil Oliver Live. I'm standing in for the great man, and I'm Liam Halligan. So since the Chancellor's mini-budget on the 23rd of September, the pound has fallen, but it's bounced back roughly to where it was before Kwasi Kwarteng's statement. Borrowing costs, though, remain somewhat higher on wholesale money markets, which of course set the benchmark for rates on mortgages and other personal and business loans, with the so-called 10-year gilt rate, trust me, up from around 3.8% before the mini-budget to around 4.2% now. Joining me now to discuss this is Chief Economic Strategist of Net Wealth, Dr. Gerard Lyons. He formerly advised Boris Johnson when he was London Mayor, and he's also recently been advising Liz Truss, particularly during that Tory leadership contest. Jerry, great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us on your Saturday evening. To what extent do you think the mini-budget was to blame for this financial turmoil that we've seen and the seemingly inevitable U-turn on that 45% top rate of tax?
Well, good evening. It's great to be on the show, Liam. Just to clarify, I'm not advising anyone. I'm an outside economist, but I know that Liz Truss, before she became Prime Minister, asked a few outside economists, including myself, for our views. So important to stress that I'm not advising her. But in answer to your question, I think the mini-budget was this sort of, I won't say the last straw that broke the camel's back, in the sense, as some people have said, I think, as you've touched on, it was a combination of factors. And therefore, it would be unfortunate to blame the mini-budget solely, although that naturally contributed to the market turmoil. In fact, there were a combination of factors. The very febrile environment in the financial markets was not helped by a global backdrop where the American central bank was clearly set to raise interest rates, and that was making the dollar very strong across the board. Then on top of that, on the evening of the mini-budget, the Bank of England raised rates by 0.5%, a significant amount. Not as much as some in the markets had hoped for, because on the Wednesday of that week, the Bank of England met on the Thursday. On the Wednesday of that week, the Americans had raised rates even more. So on the Thursday, the Bank of England raised rates significantly by not as much as the Americans. And then also on that same day, the Bank of England said that they would sell gilts, government stock, which added to the worries in the market because there was a lot of supply. And then on the Friday, we had the mini-budget, where the Chancellor not only announced what the market had already expected, the energy levy being set, and reversing two big tax increases, national insurance and corporation tax, but then he went that little bit further. So really, in answer to your question, it was a combination of three factors. The global environment set by the Americans, second, the actions of the Bank of England, but thirdly, the mini-budget, and then over the weekend, the Chancellor doubling down to very much defend what he had done in the mini-budget. I think market interest rates would have increased anyway, even if we had not had a mini-budget, but that certainly added to the tough environment we've seen in recent weeks.
Jerry, you're a PhD economist. You've been shortlisted in the past to be Governor of the Bank of England. You really are somebody across a lot of the technical detail here, but having known you a long time, I know you're also a very astute student of politics. Do you think the Liz Truss government can ever actually shake off this sense that, as Keir Starmer said, they crashed the pound, they pushed up your mortgage costs?
Well, I think one way to look at it is this, that there were three key target groups for the Chancellor and for the government. And they really covered two of those three target groups, but not the third. The target groups were the general public, and they addressed them through the energy levy, unnerved the general public, as we've seen from opinion polls. The second target group was British business. And what was interesting to note was the three big business groups, the Confederation of British Industry, Institute of Directors, and Federation of Small Businesses, who don't always agree, has to be said. All three groups were very positive and constructive about the policy environment and the mini-budget. But it was the third group, the financial markets. Financial markets were already in the febrile state, and they were already worried about the direction of global, including UK interest rates. So it was that third group that was very much unnerved. And because of how the markets have reacted, that's unnerved the general public as well. So what does the government need to do from here? I wrote an article in the Financial Times today saying very much that the Chancellor needs to focus on stabilising the markets. Therefore, it's very important and right that he's brought forward the announcement of his medium-term fiscal statement. Now, this coming weekend, or next weekend, I should say, the Chancellor and the Governor of the Bank of England are both heading off to the IMF meetings in Washington. These are the big annual meetings. And I think it's important that he again reiterates the message he gave last week in a very good statement, actually, at the Conservative Party conference. At the Conservative Party conference, the Chancellor very much was trying to allay fears about fiscal and financial prudence and discipline. So in answer to your question, I think it's very much about stabilising the situation, appealing to the financial markets, addressing their fears, stabilising that, and then very much providing some context to the general public. But with interest rates heading higher, here and globally, it's going to be a difficult backdrop nonetheless, whatever the government says.
Dr. Jerry Lyons, Chief Economic Strategist of Net Wealth, economist extraordinaire. Great to have you with me here on GB News. Thanks a lot for taking some out of your Saturday evening to join us. Now, Gerard Lyons there, he mentioned Kwasi Kwarteng's speech at the Tory party conference. I was there. And for GB News, I managed to succeed, as it happens, the only sit-down interview with the Chancellor. I'm just going to bring you just a little bit of that now. I asked Kwasi Kwarteng whether he was surprised by the quite dramatic market impact of his mini-budget. Take a look. No Chancellor, no Prime Minister, especially when they're incoming, mid-term, if you like, wants to see a market reaction that dramatic. What could you have done differently in retrospect?
Well, I think there were things, it was a very quick time that we did it. And also you've got to remember the context. I mean, what was extraordinary about that month was that we had a new government and also we had the sad passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. So we had a nation in mourning. And then literally, I think 4 days after the funeral, we had the mini-budget. It was high speed, high pressure environment. And we could have got, as David Cameron used to say, prepared the pitch a bit better. But what you've got to remember is that 5 weeks ago, we were in the middle of an energy crisis. And the energy intervention actually was the most significant thing that we did as part of the mini-budget. That was the bit that I think we showed real leadership about an energy crisis where people were facing £6,500 potentially in their bills next year. And we intervened.
Kwasi Kwarteng there stressing that his mini-budget was really about that energy price cap. Though no, that's not part that the press picked up on, or indeed the financial markets. Joining me now, going back to my panel, Justin Urquhart-Stewart, Victoria Scholar. Just a little bit of inside leg info on that interview. It was quite interesting. In the middle of that interview, the security services came in and said we had to stop the interview. And I said, but that's the Chancellor of the Exchequer. No, we need this room, because we were on a building site outside Birmingham. We were at a building site in Selly Oak. And I must say, throughout all of that, a lot of senior politicians, they totally lose it completely, those under a lot of pressure. And Kwasi Kwarteng, it's fine, no problem. so that was quite interesting. But Victoria, he was putting on a defence there. He said the measures were bold, and now he said scrapped the 45% to 40% top rate of tax. What do you think is going to happen on the financial markets next week?
Well, it's interesting, actually, because we're already seeing the pound move lower again. You know, we
about $1.11 at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, we had that big decline after the mini-budget and then quite a swift reversal. But we've actually seen the pound shift lower again. And this goes to your point that it is actually factors beyond the mini-budget that do actually affect markets as well. Because on Friday in the United States, we had a strong jobs report. And that supports the idea that the Federal Reserve needs to... The US Central Bank needs to move more aggressively to combat its own inflation. And that puts upward pressure on the dollar, and it puts downward pressure on other currencies, including the pound. So some of the pound's weakness that are coming through at the moment is actually also to do with broader global factors. And, you know, we're grappling with inflation and the cost of living crisis, but it is also very much a global issue. We're by no means the only economy to be struggling with rising price levels.
It's worth saying, Justin, UK inflation, even at 9.9%, as Victoria pointed out, it's below the Eurozone average. We thought the UK was going to go into recession. It hasn't so far, according to revised figures from the Office for National Statistics that have recently come out. And the UK's debt as a share of national income, government debt, is actually the second lowest in the G7. Only the ultra-prudent Germans are lower than us. And yet, as Victoria points out, the pound is falling, the dollar's going up, and that falling pound, it's not just about if you're going to Florida to Disney World, you know, at the exchange markets, you know, oh my God, I've only got this many dollars. If the pound falls, that leads to more inflation because our imports become more expensive. And that's why it's an important part of this policy-making conundrum.
You would think the points you just made there, they're all strong points as to why actually the UK economy should actually have a bit more support. But despite that, there was still weakness. And the reason is primarily, I think, just in terms of overall confidence. We wanted to have someone who's going to give us stability, show stability. Yes, we're going to have some interesting changes and moves, but don't worry, this is a strong, steady hand. And actually, I'm afraid all we got was people trying to be dynamic, probably trying to show off a little bit too much. And the result is, I'm afraid, the markets just didn't believe.
I'll tell you what I thought happened. I mean, the markets in Asia, they could see that the British press was going to go nuts over this 45 to 40% tax cut because it was just politically inept and ill-timed. So in quiet moments throughout the 24-hour cycle, because currency markets are always open, they're not like shares, currency markets are always open, they thought, I'll tell you what, if we get a lot of money short of the pound, if you like, trying to push the pound down, then you're going to get a doom loop, aren't you? The pound goes down, the papers go even more crazy in the UK, the pound go down some more, and the people who have shorted the pound, bet against it, making money from its fall, make even more money. I mean, am I overanalyzing this, Victoria?
I mean, I think, sort of to the point that we were discussing just before, confidence is such a massive issue. We know
but that's driven by the press.
It is, and you know, we know that consumer confidence is at a record low with the cost of living crisis. Yes, the headlines certainly don't help with sort of the doom-mongering. And yeah, I mean, this is the thing with financial markets, is that they are driven by sentiment.
Fear and greed.
Fear and greed. So when we see a sell-off, actually, what we typically see in markets is we see very sharp moves lower because that's prompted by fear.
And emotion.
Emotion. And then we sort of see slow grinds higher. So that sort of move down.
The kind of saw edge that you see in financial markets.
Exactly. So we do see those very quick moves to the downside, and that's because there's a lot of human emotion involved in financial markets.
Well, it'd be interesting to see, wouldn't it, in the next few weeks when we start hearing some comments from some of the market participants, how many actually did sell short and then buy back 12 hours later and actually just really made some advance.
It's like people who watch the Beatles at the Cavern Club. They all say that they did, but did they actually?
We'll find out eventually.
We certainly will. Hold that thought and we will come back for some more, because after the break, we'll also be bringing in the Sunday Express political editor, David Williamson, asking whether Liz Truss's government can recover in terms of its reputation. Stay with us here on GB News.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
And welcome back. It's 6:38. I'm Liam Halligan, standing in for Neil Oliver. Now, this was obviously a pretty testing first Conservative conference as Prime Minister for Liz Truss. I have to say, I was at Labour's conference in Liverpool the week before, and the atmosphere was pretty different. There was more discipline. There was relatively strong party management. There was a sense to me that the Labour rank and file sensed that power could be in the offing, so they're on their best behaviour. But what are tomorrow's Sunday papers likely to say about Liz Truss at the end of a tough week? Join me now on Neil Oliver Live is David Williamson. He's political editor of the Sunday Express. David, great to have you with us. What's the mood across what we used to call Fleet Street? Is she going to survive?
Oh, well, it's great to be with you, Liam, on this lovely evening. Thanks very much indeed. I think she is going to absolutely give the fight of her life. I mean, there's one thing that you can say about Liz Truss. It's that people underestimate her at her peril. She has been in the cabinet for such a sustained period of time, doing some of the biggest jobs in government. And she, it's fair to say, has had sniping throughout her career of people who have tried to patronise her at every turn. She is now just a few weeks into one of the biggest jobs on the planet. And I think any suggestion that she's going to bow to her critics or tone down her plans at the moment is throwing away the history of what we've seen. She did want to come in with a big bang, and she unveiled policies that perhaps had bigger blowback and bigger reverberations. This is one of those sort of Italian job moments when more than the doors were blown off. However, she has a team around her at the minute who, the big difference between, say, the end of John Major's government and now is that then you did have a feeling that most of the personalities were exhausted. They'd been sitting around that cabinet table for what seemed like generations. The difference is, and I'm sure you found this when you walked around Birmingham, everywhere you look, there are young people, many in their first ministerial jobs, lots of people in their first jobs in government as an advisor or as a PPS. And for them, this is the chance that they've been waiting for all through their school days, university, those long days in think tanks. They want to change the world. And it's really nothing less than that. And many politicians, especially in the 1990s and the noughties, you felt that a lot of them were wishing that they sort of had a bigger challenge, that it wasn't just a case of management. Well, wow, they have the challenge that they will define their lives. They're trying to control inflation. They have a mad dictator invading another country. This is something which, if they can get through this, if they can pull it off, and if, despite what the polls are saying, they can hang on to a majority in 2 years' time, this will be the stuff that screenplays will be written about.
I do agree with you, David. Walking around Birmingham, as I said earlier, I spent some time with the Chancellor. I talked to the Prime Minister. I talked to other cabinet ministers. There was a sense of, you know, they were trying not to come across as ruffled. I'm wondering if that's because they are deluded or because they're statesmanlike. I haven't quite made up my mind. The other thing I noticed, David, as I'm sure you did, there were lots of young people, absolutely. There were lots of younger MPs, the 2017 and, above all, the 2019 intake of MPs, particularly from those Red Wall constituencies. But there weren't really that many other MPs. Some of them might use the excuse of the train strike, of course, the RMT rail union, conveniently. put the latest train strike, apart from today, on the Wednesday, the day of the Prime Minister's speech. So a lot of MPs didn't stick around for that. But in general, there weren't that many MPs. As a political editor of one of Britain's great newspapers, are you sensing ferment and rebellion once more on those Conservative backbenches?
There definitely is a section of the party that is grievously unhappy with what's going on, who don't see themselves as libertarians, and who look at the type of economists who are influencing Liz Truss with something bordering dismay. Now, the question is, are they actually going to win the day? One of the problems with having had a relatively weak opposition for a long time is that parties in government can start to look at other members of their own party as the real opposition. Now, there is nothing, however, like some shocking poll ratings to focus the mind. And also, I think we saw in Liz Truss's speech how it was the disturbance by the Greenpeace protesters which actually transformed what had been quite a tense room and a real sense of it was going okay, but not anything stellar. Whenever those protesters got up, suddenly the hall was united and people shouting them down. And you could see Liz Truss realising that, wow, everyone, no matter what faction they were from, was suddenly cheering her on, willing her to succeed. And then it was as if there was an adrenaline bolt in her herself. And we saw a smile, which is interesting. We used to see it a lot. And sometimes you don't realise you haven't seen something for a long time until it suddenly returns. But the smile that was so familiar when she was Foreign Secretary, when she was especially International Trade Secretary and jet setting, suddenly it was as if she had her mojo back, to use that cliche, and was ready to take on all comers. And I think that's what we're going to see in the coming weeks. However, that's not to underplay the enormity of the challenge she faces in uniting her own party. Because one of the key questions is, where on earth did the spending cuts come from? And we're already seeing huge dissension on the question of whether benefits should be upraised by inflation, as Boris had indicated would happen, or by earnings. Now, it is not just left-leaning think tanks that are horrified by this. We can see lots of people who are saying, at the end of the day, we have just won seats in the red wall. Our voters do not vote for us because they are impassioned about a small state vision. They are impassioned about us because, well, they offered the best vision for how public services could be financed, and they didn't trust Jeremy Corbyn to do that. So how she gets people behind that, how she can find savings that don't result in rebellions at every single turn, that is going to require every ounce of her diplomacy, and her whip's office are going to have to be working overtime.
David Williamson, a masterclass in political analysis and a dash of fun as well. Great to have you here on GB News. David Williamson, political editor of the Sunday Express. I completely agree with David that the best moment of Liz Truss's speech was when she was busking, when she was off script, when she was responding to the environmental protesters who were in the conference hall, who put up their poster, their banner, and then were bundled out. Something else that happened in the conference hall during the Conservative Party conference is that I was invited up on stage to interview Kemi Badenoch, no less, who is the Trade Secretary. She was one of the standout stars of that Tory leadership contest. She's only been in the House of Commons since 2017. She's already being talked about as a future Prime Minister. And when I talked to Kemi Badenoch, I wanted to bring you just this clip. I asked her how her politics had been influenced by the fact that she grew up in Africa.
Growing up in Nigeria meant that I had experiences that can't be taken away by poor arguments. So I was born into a relatively wealthy family, but we lost all our money. So people are often confused when I talk about growing up in poverty. I experienced both, which means I'm terrified of inflation, because inflation wiped away everything that my...
And you understand financial insecurity.
Exactly.
In a way a lot of people in our political class and our media class don't.
Precisely. So it's informed a lot of my economic views, my views on authoritarianism. I grew up under a military government, so loving freedom and being free to be able to do things and think for yourself, really, really important.
Kemi Badenoch MP for the constituency of Saffron Walden in North Essex and the Trade Secretary talking to me on the main conference stage at the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham earlier this week. Justin, do you think she can survive politically? Do you think she could be the Lady Jane Grey of British politics and be out very soon?
Actually, it's quite astonishing. What she's done has been very controversial. However, if she is able to now come back and say stability, have that stability, then actually she'll get further support. So all is not gone yet.
Victoria, what is the economic outlook over the next few months? Because it's absolutely vital. It is going to make or break this government.
Well, I'd say it's pretty dismal. You know, consumer confidence is at a record low. We've got sky-high inflation, which is essentially another word for the cost of living crisis. We've managed to stave off a recession thus far, but the Bank of England is forecasting that we head into a prolonged economic slowdown that's going to start in the final quarter of this year, so this quarter now, and endure for the whole of 2023. So that's going to mean less spending, less jobs, lower wages in real terms and less tax receipts, unfortunately, for the government as well.
But the UK economy, we're still attracting a lot of inward investment. There's still a lot of really good companies out there who are investing, who are innovating. Unemployment is still pretty low, Justin. One fly in the ointment, though, we must mention, it almost got lost in the tsunami of news this week, was that OPEC meeting in Vienna, the energy exporters cartel. They're showing no quarter. They want to limit supplies of oil on global markets. They want the oil price to be pushed up.
Yep. No, as far as they're concerned, they've been in the market the past few years where they've actually had to support things. And supporting the Americans and the Saudis don't feel necessarily why they have to keep on supporting the Americans now. Maybe it's a bit of a turnaround, pushback on that one. No. What we need to know is quite right. Focus on the strengths of that the UK economy, those smaller companies, those high-tech companies, and they are all over the country.
We're good at this stuff, right?
Focus on that. Find ways of actually making sure the capital gets drawn towards them. That's one of the best ways you can actually make sure the Red Wall gets support.
And if we can deal with monetary policy, unwinding that QE monster I was talking about at the top of the show, if we can do it in a contained, civilised, understandable, gentle way, then maybe we can steer over-bloated, bubble-ridden financial markets out of this crisis.
Very difficult to actually get bubbles to actually just release air.
That's
they can
right.
go bang. But remember, we've got over a year, so by the time we get to the end of next year, maybe we've got signs of some recovery. So they start going into the next election with things not being perfect, but actually better than they were.
Stay with us, because after the break, I'll be joined by Maggie Foster. She's become a TikTok star by mimicking the mannerisms of our leading politicians, including someone called Liz Truss. You won't want to miss it. Stay with us.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other pay-per-review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back at 6:52. This is Liam Halligan here on GB News, standing in for Neil Oliver, who sends his greetings from Bonnie, Scotland. Now, does Liz Truss have an image problem? Some say our new Prime Minister's a little bit wooden and she needs to loosen up, show a more human side. Others wonder where her accent's from, given that she grew up in Leeds, Paisley, Oxford and Canada. One person who's studied the new Prime Minister's voice closely, and that of many of our leading politicians, is the actor and TikTok star Maggie Foster. And here she is, miming to a speech Liz Truss once gave about British apples and, wait for it, pork markets.
I am infatuated with British food. We have never had it so good. We are growing wheat more competitively than the Canadian prairies. We're producing more varieties of cheese than the French. And we are selling tea to China. Yorkshire tea. In December, I'll be in Beijing, opening up new pork markets. At the moment, we import 2/3 of all of our apples. That is a disgrace. I want our children to grow up knowing the taste of a British apple. And I will not rest until the British apple is back at the top of the tree.
Well, I have to say, in the GB News First, I'm delighted to be joined here in the studio by none other than Maggie Foster. Maggie, we're belly laughing here. This started for you during lockdown, didn't it? You got interested in looking at politicians, how they speak. You do an amazing Priti Patel. Your Caroline Flint is astonishing. Your Emily Thornberry, really, really incredible. What's it like mimicking Liz Truss? What were you trying to pick up on when you watched her, listened to her, in order to... It's only funny because there are flashes of familiarity. Obviously, it's a pastiche. But what was it that you looked for in Liz Truss?
Well, it's actually quite funny because when I was doing the TikToks, I tried to not really actually watch them, like their mannerisms. So I wanted to like bring a character out from what I sort of listened to. But I just think that like politicians in themselves are like quite awkward, and what they say and like. She, like, in that whole conference speech, she just paused so much. It was so awkward. She's actually really lovely. I've met her once before, and she's actually really, really sweet. But it was just an awkward, like, moment. I was just like, it's quite funny. And everything she just said, she was just like... And so I just wanted to, like, create... And she was talking about food, and I was like, she's definitely, like, a chef. So let's, like, throw an apron on and, yeah, create some pork markets. Yeah.
I've met her a few times as well in my sort of... As a journalist, it's my job to, particularly when she was Chief Secretary to the Treasury, I'm mainly an economic journalist, and it was really important that I got to talk to her. I actually think she's better in small groups. Watching that conference speech, she was good when she threw the script away and was just responding. In the leadership contest, when she was on TV, she got off the script. Then I thought her real personality came through, but she's never going to live down that pork market speech, is she? And you know, her obsession with cheese.
I know, exactly. More cheese than the friend. Yeah, no, I thought that her conference, she was much more confident. I think she, like, you can definitely see like a change in like her confidence and things like that. But I think she did well. I mean, yeah, obviously she hasn't got to the best start, but I've got faith in Liz. So yeah.
Victoria, as a woman, you're not here to talk politics, but as a human being, as a citizen, do you warm to her? I mean, you've got to admire her ambition, right?
Yeah, I think you have a point in the fact that I don't think she is the best showwoman, is she? She seems a bit rigid up there when she's giving political speeches. But obviously she's extremely intelligent and very ambitious to have got to where she's got to. I think maybe she just needs to somehow let some of her personality shine through, because I think the same is the case actually with Ed Miliband, because I've listened to his
The former Labour leader, of course, yeah.
And he has a fantastic personality when you listen to him when he's chatting with a friend, you know, in a kind of a casual podcast format. But then when he was the leader of the Labour Party, he wasn't really seen as a charismatic leader.
I think Gordon Brown was like that, going to a former Labour leader. Amazing in small groups, almost electric, sort of one-on-one, one-on-two, one-on-three. But as soon as the TV cameras came out, sort of deer in the headlights. You've got to be able to do it on telly, right, if you want to be a politician.
Yeah, and they often have their sort of agenda that they have to get through in an interview, and they sort of almost ignore the questions and say what they need to say.
Like a robot, yeah.
But I think the general public have caught onto that now a bit, and they're not as sort of stupid or a bit more insightful than maybe they're given credit for.
Justin, briefly showing our age, we'll remember when Mrs Thatcher came to the fore, emerged as Tory leader in the mid-70s and then indeed as Prime Minister. She was pretty awkward at the beginning, wasn't she?
She was absolutely dreadful.
As my mum would say, as awkward as two left shoes.
If she was awkward, she was coming out as being so crass, and particularly when you dealt with all the old Tories. And, of course, they were very happy to take the mickey out of her. But actually, then, as soon as she realised, actually, they had to sort of quickly, someone got hold of her and said, right, well, stop, change this, change the clothes, change the style, and, you know, she warmed into it. But mind you, even old Blair, I remember him, he was actually being taught by Mandelson. When he come out of the house, you look up there at the third floor of the building, even though there isn't a building there, because that's your best sight.
Yeah.
And he would do it every time.
Just wave to nothing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The theatre of politics. Right. You know all about the theatre of politics. Your TikToks have had incredible numbers. It's shot you to a fame of sorts. Are you going to carry on doing them?
Meghan Markle.
They're so brilliantly produced.
Well, actually, I was just about to say, like...
Meghan Markle with the little violin and...
I love the
Someone
violin.
said to me it should be smaller. The violin should be much smaller. But, yeah, I think with, like, what we're talking about with sort of presence with politicians speaking, I think, like, celebrities like Meghan Markle, when you hear her talk, it's very rehearsed.
Yes.
And it's very, very different from politicians. And I think that... I don't know if they get media training or whatever, but I think that's... It's quite... That's why they're a bit more awkward, politicians, because I don't think they're as trained as, like, an actress or XYZ, so...
But then those sort of Americanisms don't quite translate to the UK.
Yeah,
It almost goes the other way, a bit too polished.
It is too polished, and that's why she comes across sometimes quite fake.
And she's out of government for now, but I'm sure she'll come back. Why do you portray Priti Patel with a cigarette and a bottle of gin?
Well, actually, first of all, she did actually work for Diageo, which is an alcohol brand. So she did actually work, and that's why the bottles change, and I get different Diageo brands on every bottle. But also because I was listening to it, and she does this, like these massive inhales, like, I'm like, she's definitely having a cigarette. Like, so then I was like, just put her in some trackies. She's like a teenage girl drinking. She's basically me.
Sounds like phone calls home from university. You smoking again? No, Mum.
But yeah, no, that's why she was a teenager. But I'm sure she was pretty drunk all the time.
Well, Maggie Foster, fabulous to have you here. We are all huge fans of your amazing little films. Keep them coming.
Thank you.
Because certainly the nation needs cheering up at the moment. So great to have you on.
Very much, Harry.
And thank you to Victoria Scholar for being with us as well for this hour. And Justin Urquhart-Stewart is going to stay with us. It is 7 o'clock. I'm Liam Halligan on TV, online and DA Bus Digital Radio. This is GB News. And in a few minutes here on Neil Oliver Live, Neil says hi from Stirling, I'll speak to the people who are climbing Ben Nevis, Scafell Pike and Snowdon this weekend to raise money for a two-year-old disabled child. We look at what could be a major breakthrough also in the treatment of people with motor neurone disease. And we'll hear from the new chef of one of Scotland's largest and most ancient clans. Neil, where are you? We need you. You're watching GB News and I'm Liam Halligan, standing in for Neil Oliver. Time now for the GB News headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Liam, thank you. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Taoiseach Micheál Martin has visited the scene of the petrol station explosion in County Donegal in Ireland. Yesterday's blast killed 10 people, including 2 teenagers and a primary school girl. Police in Ireland have said the search operation has now ended. The Garda will continue its investigation. Northern Ireland's Fire and Rescue Service had crossed the border into the village of Creesler to assist with the rescue efforts. Former Deputy Leader of the DUP, Lord Nigel Dodds, has called the incident horrendous.
Every one of us can relate to calling into a filling station or wanting to call in and get some groceries or a snack or something, and to be caught up in something like this is just horrendous. And when you hear those who've died include men, women, teenagers, a young child, it really is awful. Our hearts and prayers are with the bereaved of those who have lost their lives, and obviously hope and pray that those that have been injured make a swift recovery.
The Minister for Trade Policy has said he's looking forward to clearing his name following allegations of inappropriate behaviour made against him. Conor Burns was sacked from the government after a complaint of serious misconduct last week. He's reiterated he'll cooperate fully with the investigation and that he's committed to public services.
The last 24 hours have been distressing and devastating. I've still not had any information from the party of the nature of the complaint. I say, as I said in my statement, that I will cooperate fully with the party when they engage with me, and I look forward to clearing my name. I can't say anything more, I'm sorry, at this time.
Serial killer Peter Tobin has died at the age of 76 after becoming unwell in prison. He was taken to hospital from HMP Edinburgh, where he was serving 3 life sentences for the rape and murder of Polish student Angelika Kluk and the murders of teenagers Vicky Hamilton and Dinah McNichol in 1991. Detectives questioned Tobin on his deathbed about other murders they believe he may have committed, but he refused to give any details. A large explosion has seriously damaged the only road and rail bridge linking the occupied Crimean Peninsula to Russia. Russian authorities say 3 people have died in the blast on the Kerch Bridge, which is crucial to supplying the peninsula and Russian forces across Ukraine. Moscow says the train line has now reopened. It's not yet clear if it was a deliberate attack by Ukraine. And only around 1 in 5 trains have been running today across Scotland, England and Wales. Members of the RMT union are staging their 8th strike this year in a long-running dispute over pay and conditions. Tomorrow, around half of the UK rail network will be closed, and those trains that are running will only operate from 7:30 in the morning until 6:30 in the evening. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to Neil Oliver Live with Liam Halligan.
Downstairs.
And welcome back to the show. Thanks for joining me here on GB News. Now, one of the most popular features of Neil Oliver's show each week is Great Britain's, where a spotlight is shone on ordinary people doing extraordinary things. When Frankie Ray Tupney Hockney was just 3 months old, she was diagnosed with an exceptionally rare disorder. One of just 21 people with microdeletion syndrome caused by the absence of part of a chromosome, Frankie Ray's family were told she may never walk. However, little Frankie Ray, she's a fighter. She hails from Kidlington in Oxfordshire. She is beating the odds. Her story and her walking challenge for charity was featured on this channel in June and has since inspired others to join in and raise funds. Now, Frankie Ray's mum, Mary Ella, and dad, Ben, join me now, along with fundraiser Vincent McCluskey, who this weekend is climbing Ben Nevis, Snowdonia and the 3 Peaks for the course. Here in the studio, let's talk to Frankie Ray's mum and dad. Ben, what a lovely little girl. Thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you, it's a pleasure.
Really good to see you.
Hi, baby.
Just tell us how much mobility Frankie Ray actually has, despite that warning from doctors that she may never walk.
She has hypermobility, so that puts quite a lot of pressure on her joints. So from quite a young age, we never thought she'd even crawl, but she's defeated the odds and she's managed to do that. And with constant
Physio.
She's managed to take a few steps as well. She's had a walking frame, and she's just inspired us all and actually done what we never thought would be possible. She's taken quite a few steps, haven't you, darling?
You must be so proud of her, Mariella.
I'm extremely proud. We've put in a lot of hard work with her as a family. All the teams that are involved with her, physios, OTs, they've all been amazing, and it just shows in how much she's come on. I didn't expect her to be walking. This time last year, I thought that was it, you know.
We can see some wonderful pictures there of Frankie Ray with her walker there. God, with a little tutu on as well. That's you, look. That's you.
She was off to baby ballet at that point. She loves music, and she loves to just stand there and sway from side to side.
This is a very rare condition.
Yeah.
And yet she's battling through and confounding the odds.
She definitely is. She's very determined. Very determined in everything that she tries to do. She'll always try to open something before she'll give it to one of us to do. She always wants to do something for herself, which I think has helped her in the long run in being able to actually take those steps. They're very wobbly. These were the most, on the video there, they're the most steps that she's kind of taken. But
wow, steps there with no walker at all, though. For people listening on radio, Frankie Ray has some braces. They're around her shins rather than her knees, but they don't look restrictive. They don't look too uncomfortable.
No.
They're to stop the ankle from rolling to support her.
Indeed.
Yeah, they're wonderful creations, aren't they?
Yeah, they're amazing.
And many people watching and listening on GB News Radio will be thinking, how has this impacted you as a family? There's clearly a huge amount of love in this room from among your family, but it is challenging, isn't it?
Very challenging.
Dealing with a child with a rare condition, albeit, you know, even a child who's showing as much resilience and fight as Frankie Ray.
I think with social media as well, it's so easy to portray Frankie Ray as being such a happy little girl, and she is sort of 70% of the time, but that other 30% every day is a struggle, and she can have huge meltdowns because of the syndrome, because she can't talk, so she's unable to communicate properly with us, and she will have huge meltdowns, headbutt, pull her hair, pull my hair. But on the whole, she's a lovely little girl, and she's just such
and a beautiful
ray
smile.
Of sunshine.
And Frankie Ray's elder sister's with us. You must be very proud of your sister. What's your name?
Georgie Ellen.
Oh, Georgie Ellen.
Yeah, she's.
Isn't it fantastic? Your sister's learning to walk. Do you help her?
Yeah.
Sometimes. She also likes to dance with her as well.
Yeah, she walks on her own sometimes, and you like to dance, don't you? Hold her hands.
So what's the prognosis here? Obviously, she's making huge progress. Those pictures are hugely inspiring that we've seen. Can we expect Frankie Ray to go further? Do you think she'll always need to have help with her mobility?
Yeah, I think going forward at the moment, they're not expecting her to come out of the splints anytime soon.
Right.
She will still need to use the walking frame if we're going on longer walk journeys. It's not like we can just sort of take her to the shop and walk around the shop at the moment. But hopefully, in time...
we just never know.
You know, and also with her her speech as well, she can make some sounds, but she is doing 15 single signs now, and she's able to tell us what she wants just by signing.
Fabulous.
And that's taken quite a lot of hard work.
But what a joy to unlock what she's thinking.
Yeah, definitely. She can understand everything that we say to her. She's just not able to.
She's clearly very alert.
Backwards.
And you've been raising money for charity. Lots of people have been helping you raising money for charity. How does it feel that people are, walking the tallest 3 peaks in the UK
we are
in succession in order to raise money?
So incredibly grateful to them. We honestly can't thank them enough. What they've raised so far is going to enable us to be able to get a car seat for Frankie Ray. That has to be made for her. We're hoping that going forward, that car seat is going to make a massive difference to us. And we'd like to be able to maybe get some cognitive brain therapy for Frankie Ray. And that may induce some of the global development delay to sort of widen the gap with that, which would be amazing.
So these charitable donations and indeed sponsorship money raised by people making an effort for you, that money really does make a difference to your lives. It makes a difference to Frankie Ray's life.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
a huge difference.
It could potentially be life-changing for us.
Yeah. I mean, like with the cognitive brain therapy, we don't know until we try it, but it is quite expensive to do, and if it does work, then that's just amazing for us.
Well, let's bring in now fundraiser Vince McCluskey, who this weekend is climbing Ben Nevis, Snowdon and the Three Peaks for this cause, helping kids like Frankie Ray. Vincent, what a fantastic thing to do. You're there with some of your colleagues. I think you're in Warrington, aren't you, down on your way to Snowdon?
Yes, we've just called in for a little bite to eat, a quick break.
And how's the weather? It's getting a bit colder, isn't it? Are you going to make it? Are you going to be able to do all those summits?
We'll just keep pushing on. When you see how Frankie Ray pushes on, the cold weather's not going to stop us. We're determined to complete it for Frankie Ray.
Oh, bless him.
And Caroline, why have you decided to choose this particular charity to help?
I think when you hear Frankie Ray's story and see what she's overcome so far, it's just really important. It's really important to raise awareness of a condition, and it's really important just to raise money to make her life better.
And Michael, you're putting in a huge shift here. It's a pretty tough gig that you've given yourself to climb Ben Nevis up in Scotland, the Three Peaks, and then the highest peak in Wales as well.
Yeah, it's worth it though. As Caroline's just said, to raise awareness, but to raise the funds as well. And we're having a laugh on the way as well. We've been through snow, sleet, rain, sunshine. We've had every season so far. So bring on Snowdon. Let's see what happens here.
You have got a GoFundMe page, haven't you, supporting your efforts. Do you want to tell us what it is?
Hiking for Success.
Yeah, Hiking for Success. For Ray, yes.
And do you know how many miles in total you're doing on this odyssey, this epic voyage? I mean, Britain isn't a particularly mountainous part of the world, but I've hiked those peaks that you're scaling this weekend, and it puts a taste in your mouth.
I think it's approximately 50 miles, yeah. The long one is the Yorkshire Three Peaks, which is more of a walk than a climb from what we've experienced so far.
Mariella, back in the studio, how do you feel when you see ordinary people there putting their shoulder to the mill, using their time and money and energy to do something amazing for your kid?
Yeah, so honoured for them to be doing it, and just watching them, just then Ben and I both had a tear in our eye because we weren't expecting that.
It's absolutely inspiring what our friends and people are willing to do.
And their friends
for our
doing.
girl.
We've never actually met Michael or Caroline ourselves, and yet they're joining Vincent on that journey and doing that for Frankie Ray.
We're ever so grateful.
Yeah, it's amazing.
There's a lot of doom and gloom around at the moment, isn't there? But there are good people out there.
Wonderful.
I mean, in some ways, obviously, Frankie Ray, you wouldn't have it any other way. She's beautiful and she's your child and you'll do everything for her.
Absolutely.
But it is a challenge, and yet challenges like this can be life-affirming, right? Particularly when complete strangers come out of the woodwork and say, we're going to put our arms around you, you're not going to meet us, but we're going to do something that helps you just because we want to help you.
Honestly, if my arms could grow, I'd give them all a hug.
Yeah. Like we've said, we're just so grateful for it.
Yeah.
And we're so grateful to all of you for coming in. Mariella, Ben, Georgia. Georgia Ellen, look after your little sister. I'm sure you will. And indeed, Frankie Ray, Tupney, Hockney, and the incredible mountaineering team scaling the heights of the UK, Vincent McCluskey and Michael and Caroline. Thank you so much for joining us. What a wonderful story that tells us so much about human nature and about the UK. After the break, we'll find out about a major breakthrough in the treatment of motor neuron disease. I'll be back in just a few minutes.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
And welcome back. It's 7:18 here on GB News. This is the Neil Oliver Show, and I'm Liam Halligan, standing in for Neil, who sends greetings from Bonnie, Scotland. Now, scientists believe a new drug could be a turning point in the way they treat people who suffer from motor neurone disease. Clinical trials have shown that tofersen can slow and reduce the progression of the disease. Patients who took part in the trial reported they had better mobility and better lung function. To discuss this breakthrough, I'm joined by Nanette Meller, who's the CEO of the Brain Charity, and Danny Baird, who suffers from motor neurone disease and has been having tofersen injections for the last 5 years. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us here on GB News. Danny, let's talk to you first. Now, motor neurone disease, it's a fairly rapidly progressing neurological condition. It attacks the nerves that control movement. It affects around 5,000 people across the UK at any one time. How have you felt having these injections of this new tofersen? Have they enhanced your life, Danny?
Well, when I was offered it, it's hope, isn't it, when you've got a disease like this, that maybe they could do something, and they have. And I mean, it's 5 years of commitment to have. They're lumbar punctures, so it's 5 years of commitment to have them. So, yeah, I felt hopeful.
You must be in touch with other people with your condition, Danny. Yeah. Is this quite widespread, the new use of this new drug, or are these trials quite restricted?
No, I'll say the only people that are benefiting from this drug are people with a certain gene, because my MND is genetic. So the only people that are going to benefit are the people who've got the SOD1 gene, I'm afraid. And that's not actually very many. It's like 2% of all the people with MND. So,
and Nanette Meller, you're CEO of the Brain Charity, as I said. Do you think this is a serious breakthrough, this new drug? And where does the drug come from?
I do think that the breakthrough is something to really be celebrated. You know, it's absolutely right that it will only have an impact on quite a small number of people who have MND. But I think the science that was used and the results that come back, because they've been really positive, they can then use those techniques to go on and develop, different types of therapies and drugs for people with MND. So I do think it's a really positive thing. In terms of where it comes from, it's been created by a firm called Biogen, and essentially what it does is there are several genes which are which contribute to MND, and this particular trial basically gave drug therapy to target one specific gene, and the gene that it's targeted is the SOD1 gene, and that gene normally is responsible for breaking down toxins within the brain that go on to damage motor neuron cells, which are those cells that are responsible for helping us to walk and talk, move our muscles, and it's been really effective in stopping the damage that happens when you have that gene that's faulty. So I think it is a really, really, really brilliant breakthrough, for a condition which for a lot of people is absolutely dreadful. And, I think it really gives an awful lot of hope.
Danny, tell us about how lockdown was for you. Many people with mobility challenges did feel isolated during lockdown. And in particular, Danny, were you still able to get your tofersen injections? How often do you have them?
Should I press this? No, that will just mute you.
Can you hear me, Danny? Danny, I was asking if you can hear me, how often you have your tofersen injections, and were you still able to get them during lockdown?
Just keep sitting there looking pretty.
I think Danny's having a few communication issues there. Nanette, do you know how often these tofersen injections are, and the extent to which this drug, which clearly has enhanced Danny's life, is available? Can people get it on the NHS? Is there a waiting list?
Hi, yes. In terms of the waiting lists, at the moment, these drugs, they are going through trial processes, so not readily available for everybody at the moment. And I think in terms of how often they happen, I don't know exactly how often they happen, but I do know that people who were on the trial took the drugs for 12 months. So yeah, I think it will now lead on to a much bigger trial potentially, and then hopefully it will be available to people much more readily.
Danny, I think we've got you back now. I think we've re-established communication with you. I was asking how lockdown was for you, because for many people with mobility challenges, it was a tough period. And were you still able to get access to your tofersen injections during lockdown, Danny?
Sorry, could you repeat that question?
I certainly will. How was lockdown for you, Danny? A lot of us are concerned that during the pandemic, people with mobility challenges felt even more isolated than normal.
No, mine was fine because our trials carried on as normal. So I was never worried about not getting the tofersen. And I went to Sheffield every 4 weeks to have a lumbar puncture. So they were marvellous. So it carried on.
I must say, you really do. MMD is obviously a really tough condition to have. You do seem pretty upbeat. You do come across as if this drug has really seriously enhanced your life, Danny. Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Well, it hasn't cured me, but the fact is it stabilised me, and I really think I haven't got it all worse since I've been on it for 5 years. So it's doing something for me. And I am a positive person, so, you just got to accept these things.
You clearly are a very, very positive person. And to somebody who isn't by any means an expert in medicine, I do know that motor neuron disease tends to be quite a rapidly progressing disease in some people.
It is, yeah.
The fact that you're sitting here talking to me saying that your condition has been pretty stable for the last 5 years, that sounds like a real result, Danny.
Oh, it is a result, definitely a result. And everybody else in the trial that I've spoken to feels the same. They've stabilised. I don't know how many people are on the trial, but I think there was about 11 of us.
That's astonishing. And Nanette Meller, CEO of the Brain Charity, when you're suffering from a condition, a degenerative condition, with all respect, that Danny is suffering from, the idea of a drug, a treatment that can contain the condition, can stop it from undermining your quality of life more, that gives you hope, that gives you mental strength, that gives you the ability to really sustain a decent life, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it does, absolutely. And I think, you know, for anybody affected by a condition like motor neuron disease, you know, it obviously it is going to, you know, really attack you physically. But of course, you know, for those living with it, they have to also cope with the anxiety and the depression that it brings. So to be given a drug which halts the progress of it, and obviously it's very new still, and you know there's a lot more information that the scientists need, but you know, to listen to somebody say that in 5 years that, you know, their MND hasn't progressed, I mean, it's something that, you know, I really wouldn't have ever expected to have happened this fast. I know that there's an awful lot of research going on at the moment on the brain, but it's such a complicated organ that we really are a very, very long way from understanding how it works. So, you know, the idea that our scientists can now identify the specific genes that are causing the problem and then introduce a drug which either gets rid of those genes, turns them off, or alters them in some way is absolutely fascinating and such good news for so many people.
Finally, let's go back to you, Danny. It's only right that you have the last word. Just in a nutshell, can you sum up your feelings about the people who developed Tofferson, the people who administer the Tofferson to you, the people who have been helping you with your treatment? What's your message to them?
Well, I was 5 years in Sheffield at the research centre, and they were just amazing. And it's Professor McDermott up there was the leader or the head of the trial, and now I'm going to London. But everybody is just fantastic. So I have no complaints. But because it's hard, you know, it's hard having this awful disease. So it does limit your life. I mean, I can't walk. There's so much I can't do now that I used to be able to do, but that's not progression in a way. It's because, probably because I'm getting old. I don't know. But yeah,
Danny,
no, I think
let me say that you've said that the people who've treated you are fantastic. I think I can confidently convey from GB News viewers and listeners that you are fantastic, Danny Baird. The spirit that you're showing and the determination that you're showing is incredibly uplifting, and I wish you all the best. And thank you also to Nanette Meller, the CEO of the Brain Charity. Really, really good to talk to both of you. I'm just going to ask my panel now to respond to that incredibly uplifting piece of television, I think. Justin Urquhart-Stewart is still with us, but we're joined now by Andrew Eborn. Great to have you with us. You don't look like Victoria Scholar, but
I'm so sorry. I came in, but I did get the message about the ties to match our eyes, is what I was told, so it looked brilliant. It's a great story, because the statistics for MND are terrible. A third of people die in the first year, and path.
I didn't want to mention that when we had Danny on.
The good news, however, is that Stephen Hawking, famously, he was diagnosed at 21, but he survived to 76.
And what a life he had.
And what a phenomenal life. The more we look at these things and shine a spotlight, the more we're finding some great news. And they very recently talked about the human genome as well. They found the 100% sequence of that. And what that means is the advances in medicine are going to be tremendous over the next few years. And we've got such bad news about the economy and about wars and so on and so forth. The good news gets hidden a little bit. And we should be screaming from the rooftops about these great advances. So it is a message of hope. In the same way as your wonderful thing with Frankie Ray, and what glorious sort of moments about those. You need more people like that to shine a spotlight on the good that's happening. What I would like to do about the 3 Peaks Challenge, however, I would make sure it's 4 peaks, because we're not currently including Northern Ireland.
We're not.
We're not. Isn't that scandalous? So, and what is it? It's 850 metres, I think it is. There's one in Northern Ireland, which should be added to that as well to make that make sense.
I'll text the lads now
get up there
and make sure that they...
I'll sponsor that as well.
I'll tell you what, I'll text them when they get to the top of Snowdon, shall I, and say, your work is not done. You better get in a helicopter and cross the RSC.
Sleeve Donner, I think it is. 850 metres we could add to it. It could be good.
There it is. And Justin, these incredible progressions that we make, this Tofersen drug, I mean, this is produced by business, by the pharmaceutical business. It sometimes gets a bad rap. It sometimes deserves a bad rap, Big Pharma and all the rest of it. But without those big pharmaceutical companies, whatever you think about them, we wouldn't have incredible human stories of endeavour and hope and determination, such as we just heard from Danny Baird.
We need the big pharma businesses because actually making money out of it is really very difficult. How long does it take from the day you start to the day you actually get it through and approved? And the answer is most of them don't make it. So you've got to have so many failures to actually then to be able to then make sure you got one that gets through that pays for the rest of them. So well done. And also, actually, on the smaller companies, we're very good at actually for a few focused areas where we've been able to do that. And they need to be able to have more finance heading towards them. And again, it's one of the businesses we should be trying to focus in terms of British investment.
And just on a sort of monetary note, pharmaceuticals, our second biggest export earner, right? It's still a major part of the British economy.
Yep. Yeah. Well, the National Institute of Health have just committed another $600 million into researching the brain as well. So there is good news out there.
Absolutely.
And we should shine a spotlight on that. So there's a message of hope, which I think is fantastic.
Particularly on a Saturday.
Hey, that's what you want, Saturday night.
OK, I'm self-conscious enough trying to stand in for Neil Oliver. I haven't got the cravat. I'm sort of 7 out of 10 on the hair, but I'm not quite there. But this next story is really one that Neil should be covering, but here goes. Now, one of